Yo, I'm hopping on here to talk to a kid. I say a kid, I don't know how old he is, that I have never met, but I found very interesting from Colorado. His name is Maiko on this. I don't know his birth name is. And he is a heavy thinker, and I think he makes music. Um, Basically, I've been trying to. Our paths crossed at some level, and we were talking about doing a podcast maybe at some point. That didn't happen before I left Colorado, um, and we'll see what we talk about. I have nothing in mind. I just know he's cool and interesting and has some insights, and basically he's gonna pop on. I think if he's got the app, we'll wait for him in a second. What up, Bo Garbett? Yo yo, Faith, aloha. Like I said, I'm waiting for this kid from Colorado, and we'll see if he comes on. And if he doesn't, then I'll just stop being on and I'll delete this, which won't be the end of the world. Hope everybody's day is going well. Um, we shall see how this goes. I think it's Mardi Gras. I just saw Mike the Peace Dealer straight up in the street. He just posted a video. Go check out. Um, I don't know if it's his real last name or not, and if I can even pronounce it. But look up a friend of mine who's the peace dealer, right? Michael. And he just posted like 10, 20 minutes ago. In the streets of Mardi Gras, he saw the Hispanic dude who's all about Jesus. It's like, I love you, God. I love you, Jesus. Like, and is very lit, dude. He just met him, I guess, in the streets of Mardi Gras. Anything can happen there, I guess. Let me message him on my other phone and see if he's got it going. What up, Matthew? I'm gonna be bringing somebody on to shoot the shit. Did you get an invite? We'll see how this goes. But yeah, I think he's more into Buddhism, Alan Watts kind of vibe, probably McKenna. He was just saying that he's friends with somebody and a business partner with somebody who's started the psilocybin legalization situation in Denver, which is pretty cool. What up, Kara? Kara, I hope I'm saying your name right. It's funny with Facebook names because some people have, like Maiko is his Facebook name, Maiko Triz, right? It's like, I don't think that's his given name. I don't know if his parents named him that, which is fine. Um, Word, here he comes. Ta da. I think I clicked it. Mercury is about to go retrograde, so we'll see how this Kara word. Yeah. Oh, derp. Did I do this right? Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. I see you, bro. I think I tried to add you, but now it's not working. So let me see if I can do this again. Duck, duck, duck. Um, derp. Let me hang up. Okay. Did fuck? Maybe I screwed it up. I don't think I did. I thought I clicked like accept or something. Here we go. Here we go. Approve. There's a sliding bar on the bottom when you're doing a live, and it was slid into the right. So I guess now I see how this operates more. What up, yo?
How's it going?
It's going. It's going. You're in the car chilling.
Yeah, man, I'm actually, I'm still a slave, so I'm giving Lyft rides. I'm waiting at the airport.
That's what's up. That's a very zeitgeist oriented kind of position. I mean, I'm not hating on that. That's a good way to make some quick cash. Use your automobile and the technology at hand. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not hating. Everyone's got to do something.
I'll be right back. I just
I bet he got a Lyft call or an Uber call, which might be funny. Um, we'll see how this goes. But I guess I get to stall. So, astrologically speaking, Mercury, the Sun, and the Moon are in Pisces as we speak. So everything's going to be this kind of wishy-washy, dreamy, loose, devoid of ego, but ego-less word. Here we go. Prove. Anyway, it's a cool astrology right now, and so I'm happy I'm doing this with him now. Um, word. I think it's adding him. I don't know. The portal, exactly. It's like a real portal, straight up and down. The guest declined the live invitation, so now I gotta do it again, probably. Approve. Adding. Oh, he's going to restart his phone. Okay. So I get to sit for a minute and talk. What up, Jonathan? What up, Sean? Adam. See y'all popping on. I'm just gonna be shooting the shit. That's how I roll these days. I just gave an astrology reading to a woman in Michigan for about 30 minutes, and she's really cool. Leo Sun, uh, Scorpio Moon, and she like I was going into it and resonated, so that's cool. I'm getting to a point where I'm like I can probably start. Word, his phone is glitching. It's gonna restart. I could probably start being like, hey, I'll give somebody a tarot reading, like not a timed one. Some people are like $200 an hour. It's like fuck that. I could be like $20 for like your chart and some cards and some advice and a talk or whatever. I could probably do that soon. So maybe I will. In any event, Stacy is her name, and she's talks to spirit in a very real way. Doesn't surprise me. She had a North Node in Pisces, right? So I'm just like, yeah, it's your destiny to be channeling and medium, like getting in tune with spirit in such a way that we can all grok this stuff. Cindy, what up? Doll is on. Holy shit. I don't know Doll's real name. Doll Sim. Maybe that's his birth name. I don't even know. What up, bro? I gotta get a talk on here with you soon. I don't know if he's still on here. But like I said, we're waiting for this kid's phone to restart and then I'll hop back on. I'm not really sure what we're gonna talk about. I think he's coming. He's got a lot of interesting perspectives. He just, I don't know if he has a YouTube channel up right now, but he had sent me some links to some videos he was doing about the Chapel Perilous, which is I don't know if it's Philip K. Dick or Robert Anton Wilson or who, but it's like a concept of kind of getting initiated through psychedelics and otherwise into the conundrum of reality, right? And he's shared a few of my posts, so I think whatever I post sometimes has been resonating with him to the degree that he digs it. And like I said, there was a point when I was like, when I was in Colorado, I was like, yo, like he needed a roommate or something. I was like, yeah, maybe I'll come swing through and be a roomie. That didn't come to pass. So this is literally the first time beyond texting. Like I talked to his voice 10 minutes ago and I was like, all right, cool. I fucked up my rice cooker. It wasn't plugged in. Mercury retrograde. So the meal I was expecting is going to be like an hour away in a slow cooker. And I was just like, yo, you want to talk? He's never done live before. And I don't know if he knew it was a thing. Like I was like, yo, we can kind of stream and have people watch and talk about whatever. And he was down to do it. So waiting on him. Hopefully he doesn't get an Uber call or whatever while we're doing this. That might be problematic. Actually, that'd be funny if like he left it on his dashboard and we like talked to the passenger. Could be like that HBO taxi cab confessions, but like not hypersexualized. How's everybody's day going? Kay, how you doing? I'll wave. I'll wave to you, Kay. I'm getting used to this stuff. John Pickle, what up? What up? John is into shamanism. Uh oh, I will look up your chart. If you could tell me where, message me, doll, and I'll give you a reading, dude. Like I said, I'm at a point where like if anybody wants a reading, I'll just do it as a friend right now and kind of just building. I'm sharpening my scissors, as it were, and just making sure this is something that people resonate with because I wouldn't want to try to hustle people for cash if it was like not of value, right? But it seems every time I give an astrology reading and pull cards and stuff, like people are like, "Fuck yeah, you should do this." I'm like, "Word." I'd rather play music. I'm a musician, but right now I'm in Ecuador for 6 months, pet sitting. I have a whole lot of time, and I can try to make some liquidity maybe through that. Anyway, I've never had to wait this long for somebody. I'm not being impatient, but I'm just for the people that have come on. I'm waiting for this kid to restart his phone. Could be worse, I guess. How's everybody's day going? Emily, oh, here we go. Bada bing, bada boom. Uh, Oops, how do I do this? No, 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 no. Emily. Yeah, how do you join again? Let's see. Let me see. Maybe I have to do something weird. Hmm. Yeah, maybe that's it. Cool. Tim Losi in the house. What up? What up? Timothy. I don't know what you go by. But anyway, Doll, to finish up my thought there really quick, send me your birthplace, time, and date, which you've done, but like the time you popped out, and that should. Oh, no, I'm kidding. Kind of. It's really like that. He was on and now he's not. I'll try this again. Word.
I'm back.
I could tell. Yo, yo. I was kind of giving a basic kind of thing where it's like, oh, we've never talked, and for the record, if you've got to bounce during like an Uber or whatever you do, Lyft, that's all good. Like, don't sweat that. Um, but yeah, like the fact that we've communication a little while I was in Colorado. Oh my God, he closed it, but I'll have to add him again, I guess. Uh, mm, um, well, maybe he got a call because I don't think he's even in the room right now. This is kind of funny because like Merc is about to go into retrograde, and it's just like, of course, this kind of stuff's going to be happening. Here we go. Cool. Approve. So maybe this will be a thing that's like not going to work with live. Are you getting calls, or are you just hitting
No,
buttons inappropriately?
no, it's just my phone is glitching because it's gotta like run the Lyft app at the same time, and the live broadcast is it's a little too much for it. It seems like.
Derp. Well, if this doesn't work, all good. We can do it another way another time.
I think
But
it'll be okay. Let's just make it a short one, eh?
yeah. So, do you want to talk about Chapel Perilous for a minute? That's the video I've seen
Sure.
of yours. Do you want to give me some? I didn't know if it was Philip K. Dick or Robert Anton Wilson. I forget, or if it was even either of them that have come up with this concept. If you want to just riff on that for a minute.
Sure. So it's more so a Robert Anton Wilson thing officially, but Philip K. Dick is definitely no stranger to this concept either. Um, I'm not sure if Robert Anton Wilson is the one who coined it. I think that he pulled it from somewhere else, and it's likely that because he was part of a lot of secret societies, I'm sure he probably pulled it from one of them,
Mm.
but probably one of their secrets, so we can't talk about it too much.
Wink,
Um,
wink, hush, hush. Yeah.
yeah, but now it's out, and a lot of people are talking about it, so it's kind of okay. And basically, the concept is really simple, and it's not really that um, dangerous to talk about. It's actually really helpful. It's just kind of part of like the initiation process for any system, mystery school or system of higher work. But essentially, what it is it's like a state that you enter when you confront something, some piece of information or some experience that makes you, well, it contradicts like your entire paradigm in some way. So the classic example is like finding out that you've been lied to systematically, whether that's by the government or somebody that
Mm.
you know. It could be created by somebody cheating on you, or it could be finding out that a conspiracy theory is true, or it could be, I mean, Robert Anton Wilson in his book The Cosmic Trigger, which is one of the most important books I've ever read, if not the most important. He sort of intros with it because it's necessary. The whole book is like basically thrusting you into that space where everything he's talking about sort of it contradicts a lot of what mainstream society teaches you. But essentially, what happens is um, there's only two. He describes there's two pathways that you can take once you confront this type of completely like shattering information. You can either become paranoid, like to the extent of like a schizophrenic, or you can become agnostic. So one is to say like, wow, all of this is really bad, and also completely true, and I'm just gonna buy into it. But the problem with that is it's almost like a form of dogma in itself that you're applying to your own life. Um, so the alternative then is agnosticism, which is the idea that you're not really sure. And this is important because
Hold on
well, it's
loosely kind of
it's
thing.
what yeah, it's what helps you get out of bed, you know? It's like it's the
Yeah.
only functional mindset to have really because um I mean, at the end of the day, you shouldn't make any rash decisions or actions until you know for absolutely sure. But the thing with that is you never really know for sure, you know?
I was
So,
about to ask you if you believed in certainty. I had a dark night of the soul in Switzerland where it might have been a Chapel Perilous moment, quite frankly, now that I think about it. I got physically nauseous. We can talk about this in terms of personal praxis and like have you been in it or whatever. But about a year or two ago in 2017, I was in Switzerland for a year. And there was a point basically where I was just like my epistemological framework, the glasses got loosened where I was just like, oh shit, this is a choice to believe in. Like, I mean, I can use informers like culture, religion, experience itself, reason. All these things are informers, but nothing has certainty is impossible. Like there is no such thing as certainty. I have to make like a wager with myself in reality and participate with it willingly or whatever. And that was disorienting as fuck. It was very ecclesiastical for me. I was just like, oh my fuck, what's going on? It wasn't a nihilistic situation particularly, but it got to a point where I'm just like, uh, yeah, it's like I now that you're when you enter, and I'm not going to cut you off anymore. I'm going to let you keep talking. It seems when you enter this chapel perilous, it's a cognitive dissonance chamber essentially, and you're having options. It's like, okay, Neo, look, you've seen this shit pop out of your belly. You know that's not really in your world. You know, like this mechanical thing that's like in you, like a tracker or whatever. How do you want to proceed? You can either fucking not take this seriously, or you could take this seriously, and you go from there. Keep riffing. I'm sorry to cut you off.
yeah, I just want to share my favorite quote from Star Wars, actually. It's
Word.
only the Sith deal in absolutes. So the idea there is that there's really no certainty, you know? And so that's why I consider myself, if you ask me like what my religious uh, framework is, it's I call myself an agnostic Gnostic, partially
Nice.
because it's like an oxymoron. It sounds funny, but also because I believe like it is really true. Like a lot of reality is kind of does present itself as like a paradox, but in this case, it's
It's
not a paradox. I don't really believe in paradoxes actually, but in
we,
this
you want to
case,
talk about that for a second? Because I think
well,
everything is
sure.
paradox inherently. Like at the end of the day, I
Well,
don't see how it's not. But
right.
whatever.
So
If you
I
don't want,
a paradox is like a singularity, and for anybody that knows about physics, singularity is really just the way that they describe an event that is undescribable. Like it's something
mm-hmm.
where the information falls apart, or at least it's not present enough to draw any conclusions. So that's why they say the Big Bang was a singularity. That's why the transhumanists talk about a singularity that's on the
Mm-hmm.
event horizon, like in the future. And at that point, we just don't know. Ultimately, that's what it is. So I think that's what a paradox is too. It's something that seems to contradict itself, but truly, I don't believe that's possible. I mean, I think that philosophically, a contradiction is I mean, it's a contradiction. It's like inherently something that doesn't make sense. And I think, although there's a lot of things that seem not to make sense in the universe, I think everything does really make sense. And there's just different levels of perception and understanding. So I think a paradox is
I
really
hear that.
that hasn't been solved yet, because
So
we just
yeah,
simply
it's a
have the
problem
tools.
from. I hear you totally. Okay, maybe I actually you might have just helped me because I'm always like life is paradox, and it's like if life were paradox, like pink fucking elephants would be manifesting randomly. Like it would be uncoordinatable. Like it would just be like chaos, like whatever's inside of a black hole kind of thing, or Lost, like the black box and Lost, or whatever. It'd just be like what the fuck. And though I think what you're saying is ultimately there's a cohesion and a Tao, or however you want to put this to things, but it might be outside of our perspectival ability to grok.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I think a paradox is. And ultimately, um, I don't believe that there really are like that's the thing. So here's an example of like so when you say there are no absolutes, that is an
That's an
absolute.
absolute. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you. Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, I'm
so
like,
then
I'm, yeah, I'm not cool with certainty, but like even that, I'm not certain about. Yeah, I hear you totally. It gets into like almost like semantics pretty quickly, in terms of that, like structuring of the language, in terms like what you're saying, like when like there are no absolute statements is an absolute statement kind of thing. So it's a self-refuting statement. Therefore, you kind of back to square one.
Mhm.
Okay, so back to Chapel Perilous a little. Have you had experience? Have you been through the chapel yourself? Do you think? I mean, is this like is this something that happens more than once? Is this in your estimation, kind of a dark night of the soul, but from a non-religious perspective?
Well, I've definitely experienced it. At least I think I have, right? It's hard to say, like, so just with DMT, for example, I just want to share
Oh,
this.
well, yeah, I hear you on
Let's
that front right
so
away.
the first few times that I started interacting with that substance, I'd heard all these stories about like a breakthrough and like this thing that you were supposed to expect. And so I kept having these really crazy, profound experiences on it, but I never had an experience that I considered to be a breakthrough. And so
Hmm.
eventually I sort of realized, like, oh, I actually have. And a lot of those experiences I had were the break. Like, I did break through, I just didn't realize it. So I think in that same way, I've also experienced Chapel Perilous many times. And the thing is, I think it's kind of like a compounding thing. Like the deeper you go, the next time you encounter it, it's even more severe or something like that.
Hmm.
It could also be the opposite too, because I think for a lot of people, the first time they go through it, it might be more severe just because the contradictions are much larger, just because you're more of like in that slave state, like it trapped in the matrix sort of. So then from there, once you kind of have that first really severe initiation experience of Chapel Perilous, then the following ones might not be that severe. Ultimately, I don't really know. I'm not too much of an expert on this, and I haven't spoken to too many people about it. But from my own
Yeah,
experience, I've
if
definitely
if you
experienced
cross any
it.
tape that you don't want to talk about, like I'd love to talk about. I've done dimethyltryptamine twice in 2011 within like a week and blasted off and broke through both times. There was no question on my mind that I broke through. It was like I wasn't like, wait, is this like like I was talking to transdimensional beings about my faith and shit. It was just like, but at some level, I'm not sure if that was Jungian internal projections and me interacting with my psyche, or if these were higher dimensional beings. It seems either are very plausible. It could be both and. I mean, I'm. It's not maybe either or. Maybe it's both and. I'm not sure. But I just want to say, if there's any topics I know, I was like, yeah, if there's anything you don't want to talk about, uh, I'm willing to talk about my experiences, but that can be kind of incriminating to some people. Like, I don't think you care. But there's some people who are like uptight business people who are like, I can't mention this because I'll be fired. So it's like, if there's anything we start talking about that you don't want to talk about, just be like, ixnay on that. I'll be like, word. Um, so, do you want to talk about DMT and psychedelics a little or not really? Or how do you feel about that?
Well, sure. I mean, I'm not a businessman yet. I mean, I sort of am working on a
Right.
startup right now, and hopefully that'll take off and be pretty high yielding and whatnot. But honestly, I would rather be that because the thing is, you get to choose, and like a lot of people end up selling out to a certain extent, and that's okay to a
Mm.
certain extent because it helps you. It can actually help you in the long term, right? That's the idea. It's like if you sell out a little now, it'll pay off more later. You'll be able to do more good and fight the selling out kind of thing later. But the problem is that when people sell out, they kind of become bitter about other people who don't sell out. So that's a danger.
Yeah.
It's if you sell out and like you wish you had all these plans for ways you were going to do things, but then you had to sell out, and then you see someone else come along and they're not selling out as much, but they're, just as successful or more successful, then you get all bitter about it, and that creates problems. But ultimately, I think that shouldn't phase us because, the goal is to not sell out. And at the end of the day, like a person's personal feelings of bitterness about their own selling out and all that, that should be put in the back. That's not important. And ultimately, I think like if you get to choose, I think that honestly, I wouldn't be nearly as self-actualized as a person if it wasn't for psychedelics.
Oh, for
And
sure. I hear you on that front. Yeah.
yeah, and people deserve to know that kind of stuff. And ultimately, I think the reason this stuff is kept so secret is because they're sacred, ritualistic experiences used by secret societies for thousands of years, and they don't like the fact that they've been like developing this stuff for so long, and they have these very specific initiation processes, and now just any fucking kid can go out and like buy the stuff
Mm.
and do it themselves.
Yeah.
But again, ultimately, what's the point? Like, what's the end goal? The goal of these substances is to actualize people and to make the world a better place ultimately. Unless you're part of some kind of like crazy satanic, like egocentric, self-absorbed tumorous
Hmm.
cult or something. But
Right,
if
right.
your goal is to make the world a better place, then you should say, yeah, like we had a good run, like having these ceremonies secretly for thousands of years, but now the cat's out of the bag, and we can either be bitter about it and like kill people about it, or we can just embrace the fact that now it's becoming more accessible, and all this work that we have done developing these initiation processes can now be applied and sort of um, externalized in the public now, and I
Well,
think
it's
that's very
tricky.
interesting.
It's tricky, I think, because okay, so if you look back at shamanism in the Amazonias or the Eleusinian mysteries or whatever, people have taken this shit really seriously for a long time, and culture and as culture run programming people, like, I mean, I don't think we can escape culture. I mean, I agree with McKenna that it's not ultimately our friend because we can become consumed by it in a way and just
Hmm.
like dwell in a certain sphere and not be authentic. And but what I'm getting at is it seems there's always been gatekeepers somewhat because, or at least in recent history at least, people, now we're in a postmodern situation where we feel we have like liberal rights, like we have the freedom to express ourselves and be what we want and actualize how we want, and that is a new kind of thing on the scene, largely in the psyche and the zeitgeist. Like, I'm all for it, don't get me wrong, like I'm very Uranian, so it's like everyone do what you want, have fun, but at the same time, um, the methodologies in which these things were prescribed, if you want to put it that way, like a shaman, like I'm in Ecuador, so it's like this shit, like down in the Amazon, not too far from here, like they've been doing ayahuasca for thousands of years, right? And they have a lot less mental health issues. They integrate with their realities more, whatever, whatever. But the one dude being the shaman is like on the skirts of town. You know what I mean? He's not like in. He's kind of the fool on the hill, if you want to put it that way, in the Beatles term. Where it's like in that culture, he had to, although he was super, super essential to the situation, he was relegated to a position where it's like this isn't an everyday casual thing, and the person who's going to be like divvying this out has to kind of be not with everybody too. If they're sitting up with us at like every dinner table talking about the grandiosity of all these experiences, people are going to be more tempted to try it like casually, and they wouldn't take it probably so seriously. Same thing with Eleusinian mysteries back in the day. And, I mean, that was thousands of years on the plains of Greece or whatever. Um, and a lot of people that are pretty heavy hitter thinkers over the millennia did these things that I don't think they really know what it is. Kind of maybe an LSA derivative. That's neither here nor there. I don't need to. I mean, I'm
Oh, I
speculating.
think it was, LSD, closer to
Like an
LSD.
ergot thing.
Yeah, for sure. Because
Yeah, that's
I mean,
I
there's
meant
a lot
that
of
more.
evidence that it was an ergot wine, like an ergot
Yeah.
based wine that they were drinking.
So the thing there was that it seemed that they, I mean, Greeks, dude, we're jamming off of a lot of their programming still. I mean, in terms of linguistics and framework of like self and other and math. You know, like we're still running on a lot of their algorithms. But even they
Mhm.
were like, you get to do this once and don't talk
Yeah,
about it. You know what I mean? Basically. So it's like
yeah,
you're
and
gonna
I
enter the mysterium, but don't. This isn't like every night go to a fucking Grateful Dead show. You know, it's like
right.
we've inherited a new culture in such a way as a post 60s like thing. It's got its good sides and bad sides, but we're in a liberalized democracy to the point now where I can individuate in a very personal way and kind of thumb my nose at like systems of tradition that may have actual merit within them. I'm not a very Saturnian person, but it's like rules and regulations are there not ultimately to confine you, but like to help give order and like
Right.
cohesion to things.
And we
So,
should be grateful for that, and that's a big part of this. We need to be respectful to these ancient traditions because we wouldn't be where we are without them. And
amen.
I think a big problem is that, we've got these youths that are just kind of taking these sacred substances and throwing them around and just acting like they don't really matter and misusing them. And they might feel insulted by that. And the truth is, they have every right to feel insulted by that because, they've put literally thousands of years of work into refining these technologies. So we
So
do
here's a
have to
paradox,
respect.
right?
That's the other thing I just want to say really quick.
Yeah, yeah,
When
go
we're
for it.
talking about casual psychedelic usage, at the end of the day, that really is not the goal, and it is quite dangerous. And the truth is that psychedelics, especially when it comes to drugs or any substance really that exists in all reality, as far as we can tell, psychedelics are among the most potent, powerful, and sacred substances that exist, and they should absolutely be used with care and with some kind of systematic way of making sure that you are not abusing them, and you're also not sort of discrediting how truly sacred they are. So I would not suggest to anybody, especially when it comes to DMT, that you use it casually, right? I
I
think
don't
that
think it's
especially
easy to do
for,
that.
yeah, and,
I
and
mean,
it
maybe.
sort of has like a mechanism within itself to prevent that from happening too, which is funny. So, it's kind of hard to do it to begin with, but people do it. And, I definitely did. I mean, I was treating it very sacredly, but then at a certain point, like I mean, I've lost count, with the amount of times that I've used it. And at a certain
Damn.
point, I started experimenting with it in all these different ways, and I ultimately was trying to. I mean, I was respecting it, but I feel like I probably wasn't respecting it as much as I should have. But just to show you guys how
Can
serious I'm about it. Let's see if you can see it here.
I don't think I can. It's in the light. It's kind of like bright, bright. Oh, that's the molecule right there, isn't it? Spirit molecule.
I got that done in Peru, so
Hell yeah.
it
Word.
is a very sacred subject to me. As far as sacred things go, like some people have Jesus and all of that. To me, DMT was the most sacred sort of experience that I've ever interacted with. So I really wanted to honor it by putting it on my body.
It seems there's a spectrum of plurality, so it's not like it's either good or either bad. It's both, like, or this is why it's like, oh, this is a paradox already, but it's not. I mean, we can work through it. On the one hand, people who are indigenous gatekeepers or whatever, and people who have systems that are built up, quote, have the right and in some way to hold on to their traditions. But like we were saying in another way, in another context, like time's up, cast out of the bag. Like there, it's a both and. It's like there's the, it's tricky in the sense it's like no one side is winning that, and you could I mean I could see the validity of both perspectives in a sense. They kind of negate themselves in a way. So it's like yes, like there was a period where I was eating acid like once a week, right? And it's like that's a little extreme, but at the same time that helped me. Like it was, it's really hard because I think it's all about attention. So if I'm going into these kinds of things with just a careless, like there's been a few times where I was like, whatever, I don't even like, I'll trip, whatever, and like kind of a reckless cavalier kind of thing. Those were the experiences that I got through and were fine, but were much less profound and important and cathartic and transmutational or whatever. Whereas if I was like, all right, this is a fucking lunar full moon eclipse and I'm gonna fucking listen to chakra chants for an hour and then fill up glass and then whatever. Like sitting around watching Rick and Morty is interesting on like while dosed or whatever, but at the same time, this is where we start getting into this domain of basically like liberalized hedonism is a kind of a cultural acceptability for us. I think we've grown up with like Homer being like burping, like belching and having a lot of beer or whatever, and we like us like you see what I'm saying, like we're stewing in a pot that like shows hedonism as kind of an acceptable form of being, and I'm not saying it's not, because I think people's people's paths vary. I guess my point, if there was one, is like make sure if you're doing psychedelics, it's not so much like, oh, if you think you have schizophrenia, don't do it. I don't think it's like that. These things can heal mental quote illnesses, but what you need to do is have the proper and intentions. Like be real with yourself on this stuff. Like if you're just going out there to party, like there that might have a little different consequence in terms of content of trip and experience and all this stuff, than if you're going into it with like a more or less a head on your shoulders. But that doesn't at the same time mean like be like the most Saturnian like rule. Like if you try to go about things in a very overly organized way and try to control stuff, these things are not controllable in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, right? I know McKenna was always like, I mean, he did DMT, a fair amount of times, I'd say, but he was even like not all about, he wasn't recreationally doing it. He's like, I'm scared to enter that headspace, but I know I need to every now and then. I imagine the same things with ayahuasca. It's not something typically, I don't find people just doing like, on a Friday night because they're bored. Although because of our culture, we can lean that way, I think. How old are you, by the way?
I'm 24,
Word,
and
I'm 33.
if I could, that's a good age to be. But
It's not two shabs.
yeah, I just wanted to
What?
say, so this is
Uh-huh.
something that is discussed too frequently. I find that so psychedelics are, very powerful, also very dangerous.
Hmm.
Researching the occult, very
Equally.
powerful,
Yeah.
very dangerous. When you combine the two, like I said, I haven't heard many people talk about this, but when you combine the two, I feel like it doesn't just double the amount of power and
It's
danger,
exponential.
but
Yeah.
it's exponentially more powerful and dangerous.
Yeah.
So this should really be spoken about more, I think. Um, in my experience, in my past, the combination of those two has led to some serious some serious problems. It really has.
Hmm.
A lot of them having to do with paranoia, and again, it's kind of coming full circle back to the Chapel Perilous. I'm sure that I wouldn't be. Well, that's the thing. I wouldn't have had such scary, you know, experiences if I hadn't mixed the two. But also, I again wouldn't be so self-actualized. And a lot of the time, that's how it
Hmm.
works. It's like,
Got to
you
pay
know,
to play.
more
I mean, that's
the
how it
more
is.
powerful something is, the more dangerous, but also the more potentially valuable it is. So
Well
yeah.
said. I mean, no, that kind of caveat needs to be said more often because usually I mean, I find a lot of people who are like more into psychedelics, they don't necessarily dabble with occult, but we are in a time of, I mean, the age of Aquarius, Aquarius rules like astrology, not occultism particularly, but we're entering a time when like we can self-initiate, quite frankly. There's enough on the internet and enough communication with enough quote woke people that um, a lot of downloading can occur in a very short amount of time. And I even be like, I don't think we're in a sterile vacuum. I think the whole terrarium of being is going through an actualization process too. So it's like these are somewhat uncharted times on a lot of levels.
Mhm.
Humans have never had the ability to like directly electronically communicate across vast distances like this. And, just about anything. Like no one's like, there's no NBC censored like saying no, this is a topic we can't do. You know what I mean? Like we're in weird territory where like almost anything goes, and we're kind of arbitrating like what works between what we enjoy as a species and what we find consequentially like unbearable, kind of. Because like it seemed okay for like the 60s is a weird way to put it. It's like I think where we are now is like the seeds they planted in the 60s were blossoming, like we're actualizing and becoming what they wanted to be ideally. Like we
Yeah.
have the free, like the Beatles, all this stuff. I suggest if you've never done this, and this is, I gotta say with a warning, it's like, yes, do this if you feel led. But one of my favorite things to do on LSD is listen to the Beatles, Rubber Soul through Abbey Road, or as much of it as I can bear, like sit through. And it's just like, it's next level. It's like, this is gospel for like a material generation. Like they're speaking about love and abstract things. I mean, it's like if NSYNC all of a sudden turned into like gurus or something. You know what I mean? It's like we're too
Shaman.
young to really realize like the impact of what was going on there. But I guess my point was people like Leary and I mean, there's a few the psychedelic movement in general. Why did it not work so much? Why did it have to go underground? Eventually, started coming up again with McKenna types and that stuff. Internet really helped a lot, but why did it kind of stumble in a way? It seems that there had to be a level of appreciate. We had to. They were too modernized still. Like you can't have like the revolution takes a while. You know what I mean? And I
Can I
guess they were
I respond to
good
that directly?
for
So
sure. Yeah.
it's really interesting theory. It's not really a theory. It's more of a model in philosophy. This guy Hegel, German
Hmm.
philosopher, pretty sure he
Hmm.
was German. Um, it's called Hegel's Dialectic, and I
Hmm.
definitely suggest people check it out if they haven't heard of it. It's a really simple concept. Basically, the idea is it's like a model for explaining the emergence of pretty much anything, but it's usually used to describe social or cultural events. Basically, it starts out with a force, like some new novel thing coming into reality and sort of shaking it up. And then after that, there's a second force that's essentially a reactionary force. And so what that's trying to do is balance it out. But what happens is it goes too far and it goes the other direction, basically. Then the third thing that happens is the balancing out. It's the third thing is like a true balancing out. And so this is obviously like an oversimplification, but that's kind of the idea. It's just like a really simple model to see how things work and sort of explain, in this case, the psychedelic renaissance. And I think um, essentially it's exactly what you just said. It's at first, there was this sort of a revolution where everything changed, but then there was this great fear, and Reagan and Nixon both just kind of put their foot down and decided this is not good for society. But that was an overreaction, and a lot of people know that. And so now what we're experiencing is a very slow process of organizations like Maps sort of
Hmm.
finding ways to, and even before Maps, I mean, if you look up, oh man, I'm going to be so mad at myself if I can't remember his name. DMT, what's his name? I got a selfie with him on my profile. Anyone?
DMT, not Joe Rogan.
No, no, he's the guy that like did the
Oh,
studies. And
Shulgin?
no,
You mean Spirit
the
Molecule
spirit molecule.
author? Yeah, his name is I can see him
I
Oh my God, I could
can't,
see him. I could hear him.
you know,
What is his name?
if you
It's
look
all
up
good. It'll pop
the
in my
spirit,
mind.
if you look up spirit molecule, you can find who I'm talking about. This guy was even before maps. He was doing his
Hmm.
studies in the 90s, and somehow, by some miracle, he got the permission to basically
Rick
inject
Strassman.
people. Rick Strassman, yeah, he got
Yeah.
permission to inject people with DMT intravenously for this study at a university in New Mexico. And this was way before maps, and it was way before it was even before we were talking about decriminalizing any of this stuff. So
Yeah.
somehow he took what was essentially the most potent psychedelic and injected it into people. He made an awesome documentary about it. It's on Netflix, and you can see these people talking about their experiences. Um, and that was all very under the radar, though. Like when it happened, it was very under the
That was
radar.
like
It took
late 80s, I think, right?
it might have been, yeah, and it took like over a decade for that stuff to really come out and
Yeah.
apply itself into society. And the reason for that is because this is that third part of the Hegel's dialectic. It's a slow balancing act where now we realize, the first force was too violent. The second reactionary force was also too violent. So the answer then is a less violent, slower force that requires more patience, but ultimately it's more structurally sound. And that's what we're going through right now, I think, and you could say that that's just an optimistic perspective on things, and maybe it is, but it's also true if you really look
I
at
can
what's
dig
going
it.
on in maps,
I can dig it. So, question: given that you think the Hegelian dialectic is the model in which, I mean, I agree. I think there's a pendulum swing, is what we're talking like a punctuary event, and then a pendulum swing, and then it kind of like settles, and that's like the
Exactly.
Tao in a way, right, or Wu Wei or whatever. Do you think these things would have been avoidable if we had been using like the I Ching as a culture, or do you think that you know what I'm saying? Like, do you think there's ways around or to lessen the blow of these things? I mean, I think that's what mysticism kind of helps people do. That's why I'm into astrology and tarot and the I Ching and all this kind of stuff. It seems like that helps us not overreact nor underreact if we're reading with eyes to see. Um,
Right.
do you have any 2 cents on that? I mean, just curious.
Not really. I think you're right. I think you're right. The more that we study time and the way that uh, different things, opposites interact with each other and find balance, the more we're going to be able to um, apply that balance to our own lives and to society. So definitely.
Okay. What do you see? Because I know you said if you want to talk about your business and stuff for a second, like what your future plans are. You had mentioned earlier on the phone that you might, whoever your roommate might be, is like one of the forerunners of the psilocybin decriminalization movement in Denver. Huzzah! Props for that. What's going on? What's kind of your shtick and future plans with that? Or like, does that relate to your business model, or is this stuff you can talk
No.
about?
No, and as far as I know, Tyler, my friend, who also founded the Psychedelic Club in Denver, uh,
Word.
I don't think either of us have any plans to do business with psychedelics just because of how complicated it is right now. Although it could be potentially extremely lucrative, I definitely suggest whoever has the balls for it, go ahead and try it, But essentially, what Tyler and I are trying to do right now, business wise, is just sort of create the most sustainable and high yielding business that we can. And we found the market's going to be web design, and so if anybody needs a website, let us know. We're going to be offering some of the best work for some of the most competitive prices. But ultimately, we don't really want to design websites. That's not our goal. Our goal is to first off, find financial stability. Also, test out models to just increase yield over time. And um, the goal then is, it's very foolish, although definitely a trope these days for people to say that money is like, it's not like it doesn't play a role. It doesn't matter. I mean, you don't need money. You're more than welcome to go and be a hermit. But if you're trying to make an impact on the world, then money, just because the world has adopted it as like its primary operating system, it's definitely a factor. And the
Hmm.
more money you have, the more you can do. That's just the way it works. And
I
so
think
we're
there's a bell curve there. So I think generally speaking, within the bell curve, you're correct. There's extreme examples of people getting by with, you know what I mean, like John the Baptisting it or whatever, and getting away with murder and like making billions. And then there's people who should, by all accounts, have everything quite set up, and it just never takes off. So it's tricky there. I think the thing with money and are you into astrology at all or not really?
I'm getting more into it, but I
Okay,
not as
because
much.
Uranus entered Taurus today, right? And that's like a 7-year cycle. Uranus is this planet that basically governs, if you want to put it, we don't have to say like it's the planet doing this. I'm still trying to figure out my ontology with how that all works. But basically this Uranus is this radical revolutionary abrupt change, electric change kind of thing, and it's entering Taurus, which is basically money, value systems. What we're getting at is money has been the operating system for value for a long time now. I mean, that's how people exchange value. And that doesn't mean that if we like right now we're not making any money off this, but I think it's a very valuable conversation.
Right.
So value can exist outside of currency in that sense, but but because the bell curve is what it is, like most people have to enter the forum, the market or whatever, and exchange ideas, products, goods, services, whatever, through agreed upon valuation systems, right? And that's what money has been for a long time. The issue, it's not even really an issue, I guess. I we started seeing with cryptocurrency and blockchain kind of stuff, the decentralization of currency and valuation, and getting not that it just disappears. No one's just like, okay, like money doesn't matter. It's changing and it's becoming more. It seems like open source maybe is the best word for it. Like a culture is becoming more and more open source and maybe more confederated in the sense that like satellite, like you're going to go start a business through your bro. Like at one point, like back in medieval fucking Europe, the reason it took fucking forever to build a cathedral was because the Medicis are paying for it. And when they give us the money, we can build it. And when they don't give us the money, we can't. Like there was not it was not open source. It was very closed source, resource scarcity. I mean, all that kind of stuff. Um, do you have any are you into blockchain or any of that kind of stuff? Like, how do you see that impacting maybe where you want to go with your business model, if at all? Maybe you haven't thought about this. It's fine. It's not something I'm expertise on at all.
So I love the concept behind this blockchain technology and these sorts of things. My problem with it is, and it could simply be a matter of, having gone a little bit too deep with like the psychedelics and the occult and stuff, and reaching this level of, I guess, I can't find a better word to describe it than just paranoia. But the idea there is like it's like Tor, right? Like, have you heard of? I'm sure you've heard of Tor. It's like this browser you can get and browse the deep web with it.
I've never
So
done
the
that.
idea, yeah,
But
the idea is there's this technology that's based on proxies, and it essentially like scrambles your connection so that you can browse certain parts of the internet that are dark, or in other words,
not
inaccessible
normal.
by normal browsers,
Yeah.
just because they don't want people tracking them, right? But the
Hmm.
thing about Tor is Tor was actually developed by the military, and I don't like. There's no evidence. I haven't found any evidence that leads me to suppose that the people that created Tor wouldn't have created a backdoor, or even that any of this deep web stuff is really actually like secret. Like, what if
Right.
what if the whole point of it is to make you think it's secret so that you conduct your activities and stuff, and so they let you conduct your activities there specifically for the reason of being able to pull data from that and see how you're using it. So it's the
Right.
same with blockchain to me. It's like it's a great technology. The concept is great, but ultimately, if you're using it and you don't know how it works exactly, and you didn't actually design it yourself, then you're just at the end of the day, you're taking someone's word for it, right? You're like it's almost like dogma. And luckily, like, you can study mathematics and you can study, the way that these systems work and supposedly uh, encrypt these communications. But ultimately, if you don't know, then you shouldn't trust it, in my mind. And also, even if you do know and you have studied it and you think that you understand how it works, how do you know that it wasn't like a bait and switch? How do you know that the technology that you're using is a different technology, or isn't a different technology from the one that you believe that you're using? There's
I
really
hear you.
no way to know. And this might just be like hyper paranoia caused
Well,
again by
no,
going a
it's
little
not.
too deep.
It's paranoia, but it's justifiable. It's not like totally outlandish. I mean, basically, what we're getting into is the idea of trust ultimately. And with that, like we don't have to use it. This is a Christian model for this. It's called Pascal's wager, but this could be appropriately used. I mean, you risk. That's a firework. Don't worry. Like there's people going crazy here, so I don't know. It's not like a revolution or anything. Um, Point being, it takes trust to do anything, and it's a spectrum. There's more and less reason to trust in certain things. So I think what you're saying is correct in the sense that there's always the potential that these things have backdoors and Trojan horses or whatever, and essentially the anonymity that we're thinking that we have, like Harry Potter's secret cloak isn't so invisible. It's like maybe shadowy, and they could tell where you are enough to know what the fuck you're actually doing. Um, I would think that if that was the case, there would be a lot more people getting popped for
Well,
certain
that's the thing.
things.
That's the thing. This is really important, and I really hope this doesn't put me in danger for saying this, but like,
Okay. Deep breaths.
you can't arrest everyone that uses it because if
Sure.
you did, it wouldn't work. It only works because people don't get arrested. You know what I mean? Like
Correct.
that's how they trust it. So they're able to use the fact that they're able to use it means that they're going to keep using it, which means that if it is a system of tracking these people, and like this Corey said in this last comment or in the second to last one, it'd be the perfect way to monitor the darkest parts of humanity. Well, if you were busting people for it, then it wouldn't be anymore, right? It only functions as long as you're not busting.
Correct. So it's ultimate nanny state tech in that sense. It's like, look, we get what you're doing, Opticon's, we see it all, but we're only really going to maybe act on a few of the most egregious things because we need to keep society fabric intact. We just want to know what you're doing, basically.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
interesting. I mean, in some way, I think this gets into the idea of privacy. I'm pretty spiritual, and if you have to bounce at any point, I know you were like, "Let's make this quick." It hasn't been quick, and I could talk for hours clearly. So whenever you're like, "I gotta go," like holler, it's all good. Um, the idea that we have, I mean, especially breaking through on DMT and talking to like transdimensional beings, essentially, or whatever the fuck was going on, made me realize that a lot of my presuppositions in terms of personal audience of consciousness, privacy, if you want to put it like that, like I don't think it's an illusion to a point. I think we've built up in our minds the idea of privacy with and like space in terms of like, oh, I'm in my room and I'm secure. It's like, well, there's electromagnetic fields going through, who knows, it's like there's all sorts of shit going on all the time that we aren't perceptive of. um
Can I
I
share
just
something really quick?
For sure.
So when again, when you start getting into the psychedelics and the occult, you get paranoid. You start wondering like, is this guy like, does this guy work for the CIA? Does this guy work for this or that? So here's I'm gonna break it to you, man. The truth
Yeah.
is, every fucking person works for the NSA, man. Everybody with a phone in their pocket works for the NSA. That's how I see it. Like,
Inadvertently. Yeah.
exactly, everybody is. Like, technology's gotten to the point now where it's just so it's everywhere, it's everywhere. And so if if
Corey just said Chapel Perilous. That's what we were starting the conversation on, bro. Sync. Keep
yeah,
going.
man. No, that's pretty much it, like it's just so technology's so pervasive, and it's designed in such a way where we would have no way of knowing really if it was being used in this purpose. And considering just how big the military is and how big security is as an industry, I see no reason to believe that they wouldn't be using our phones and every form of communication as as data. And I don't
I mean,
see
that's the
why they wouldn't
Snowden thing
have.
showed us that is the case. I mean, it's just like, look, they use our activities against ourselves,
Yeah.
basically. And
Well,
it
not
is what it
necessarily
is.
against us. That's the thing. It depends how paranoid you are about the government. Personally, I don't believe the government is evil. I think there's evil people in it. I think
True.
there's good
Yeah.
people in it too. I think that they're constantly battling. And, that's really what this is about. There's people in the NSA that are genuinely using this information to protect us. Likewise, there's people that are using it against us. So it's hard to say.
So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I just want to take this in a little direction of spirituality. It seems, and tell me where I'm wrong. I know you said you were agnostic essentially through the psychedelic experience. Do you have any are you more into Alan Watts kind of like vibe? Like, how are you apprehending reality as such? How worldviews are going to bleed into how we deal with these ideas. Like, if I'm sitting here and just being like Obi-Wan about it and like, the government, if they strike me down, they don't know how powerful that, it's like, like, I won't be afraid of things if I have certain like ontological perspectives. I'm wondering what your perspectives are, if you don't mind. I mean, you might not have any deep convictions. You might have some. I don't even know. Like we're strangers
Sorry,
as far, you know.
I don't fully understand your question.
What kind of world, like what kind of informers, are you more of a Buddhist leaning where you're just like, it's all kind of this thing of information? Do you believe in spirituality? Like when you started saying like there's
Terrence
good
McKenna.
people and bad people in the government, Terrence
Terrence
McKenna?
McKenna. Yeah, he's by far probably the most influential figure in my life. Um, his
Yeah,
way of thinking
he's my ninja.
inhabits
I love
me.
him.
You'd almost say he possessed me or something. But I used to. He's like another father figure in my life. I used to listen to him like every night, like falling asleep to like all his lectures and
Did you
um.
hear the trilogues ever with him and if you haven't, I'll
Who
send
was
you the link. Or he had this series of things with Rupert Sheldrake
hmm,
and um, Robert Abrahamson or something like that. A mathematician, a chaos mathematician. I can't remember his name exactly. I think it's something Abrahamson or Abrams something. Anyway, I'll send you a link. I'll post it on here
yeah.
too. Some of the most fascinating stuff. It's kind of like what we're doing with three people, but like they are so different. That's like McKenna was kind of the in between. You had like a really pragmatic, heavy psychedelic using chaos mathematician who's just like, we're in a matrix, deal with it, and like not spiritual particularly. You have Rupert Sheldrake, who is like a Roman Catholic, I think, or Episcopalian or something. So he's a Christian, but he's like thinking about morphogenetic fields and you know, like weird. He's not a typical kind of like straight line person, but he's, you know, Oxford kind of type guy. And then you have McKenna in the middle, kind of like playfully barding between them. McKenna's my ninja, dude. Like straight up, we're Soul Tribe on that front because he's one of the bigger informers of my reality. Just even in the way of his eloquence and his presentation. It's I am not into patron saints and stuff, but it's almost like that for me. Where it's like McKenna's a patron saint for me. It's like that dude. I turn to him for advice in a way. Like I listen to his lectures. I think in terms of like how what would not what would McKenna think, but it's like it's a big informer. So it seems like it's equally one for you. You into Alan Watts? Like what other kind of thinkers are you into? Jung? Like
Yeah, I think Jung is probably the most important person that I've run into recently, just because he
mm,
really pieces everything together as far as psychology and spirituality goes, and it all makes so much sense, you know? And like,
yeah.
this might be a little off the wall, but I recently have been, I mean, I used to study like conspiracy theories a lot in high school and that sort of thing, like aliens and all that. Recently, I got back into that and went a little bit deeper than I did before, trying to figure out like what the hell is this stuff with like reptilians and all that.
Hmm.
And ultimately, I think the best framework that I've come up with for explaining all of this stuff, whether or not there have been like genetically modified like entities, you know, with like reptile genes or anything like that, ultimately, ultimately it is Jung that sort of pieced it all together for me. And like whether or not that's the thing, it doesn't even matter if these things are real or not. It doesn't matter if they're physically walking around. That's beyond the point. The point is that what Jung calls the shadow is
Mm,
it's the same either way, whether it's real or not. It's real because it exists in our minds, and as long as it exists in our minds, and it has the potential to materialize, right? And so
correct.
I've also been studying a lot of a lot of sort of like horror, like Lovecraft and that sort of thing. Uh,
Ooh, okay. So okay. I just read an article from a guy who's a blogger, and he was talking about, I'm pretty sure, an H.P. Lovecraft short story about a silver key and a guy named Carter. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Sorry, say that again.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm pretty, okay, so it's the kind of thing where it's like, this shows my ignorance because I should have asked the guys, like, is this an HPL story or what's going on? I'm pretty sure, okay, pull back. There's this guy I know from Sync Book Press, which is this cool little collective that's kind of defunct now mostly, but he's that's how I know him. Anyway, his name is Znor. I'll post the article on here maybe later, and because it's a good read. It's really far out shit. It's getting into Crowley and going through like thresholds of an initiation and all sorts of weird stuff. But the idea being, you mentioned Lovecraft. This it seems I think this was either a short story or a novel. I'm not really sure. I'm not versed in Lovecraftian worlds. But basically, this guy, it's a story about a guy who finds a silver key that can kind of get him anywhere in the world, like any time, space, anything. Like he can become anything. Kind of, it's like the transmutational situation. And
Hmm.
he found, have you not read this? It doesn't seem like you have, or else you'd be like, oh yes,
Uh,
it's this story. It's all good. I'll post this link and you should check it out. Maybe if you're into that world, because Lovecraftian stuff, I mean, I'm all about team rabbit hole, going down rabbit holes, but it's just like there's certain domains I don't try to tread too much. Like I don't want to look into Pizzagate particularly that much, whether it's real. It's like there's just certain things I'm like I don't need to know about these things. The less I know, the better for my sanity.
Yeah.
And it seems like Lovecraft's kind of stuff gets into weird, like irksome territory. Like it's almost like Alfred Hitchcock, but like literature, where it's just like this will fuck you up. Like, or whatever. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock doesn't fuck people
Well,
up
that's
like
the
that, but
thing.
it's
You know,
like
it's
it's like
like
Black Mirror or something like that.
sort of the way I see it. It's like okay, so let me just share a little bit about when I was in Peru. I became somewhat familiar with this plant called Toei, which is really Datura, and
Okay.
Datura is like one of the most powerful drugs in the world, and it's frequently used for very, very evil purposes. It's essentially
Hmm.
like a mind control drug. But the thing
The
is, and
Devil's
this is kind of
Breath,
weird.
right?
What's that? Yeah, Devil's Breath,
It's called.
exactly. So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
thing is, though, supposedly in Peru, in the Amazon region, the shamans that have been brewing ayahuasca, they've regularly been known to put it in the brew. Like it's been like a regular part of the brew. And the thing is, today, especially with the tourism industry booming and everything, it is not considered something that is ethical to use anymore. It's actually
Hmm.
considered by most shamans to be demonic. Um, but the weird thing is, certain shamans also consider it the highest master plant. And so the reason for that is because it is so powerful and dangerous. It literally is like probably the most dangerous drug in the world. And because of that, the only way you can interact with it or hope to ever interact with it and come out alive or sane is if you are a master, if you are like at the highest mental state that you possibly can, right? And so I feel like a lot of this horror stuff is almost like that too, because if you're not ready, it will definitely fuck you up. It'll
Yeah,
destroy your life, and so that's
yeah.
why you don't approach these things until you have actually like strategically in a calculated manner made a decision that you are ready. And the thing is,
Masterfully. Yeah, yeah.
I am definitely not that careful, and like I shouldn't act like I am. And I kind of feel the same way. I mean, there's definitely been like some alleys that I started creeping into, like with Lovecraft and whatnot, where I was just like, I literally cannot deal with this right now, so I'm just gonna uh, fill my head with something else and return to this at a later point. But
Mm.
ultimately, I think these things need to be dealt with because they're real, and the fact that they're so dangerous and scary means that they're something worth checking out. But that being said, you can't just go about it. You have to really prepare for it. Um, so yeah.
I hear that. Like, I have a very, very active imagination, so I've always like I remember being a kid and seeing like in Indiana Jones and the Ark of the Covenant, the snake coming out of the guy's like the skull's mouth. Like, I was like, that's not that horrifying of a thing, but it's like I couldn't stop thinking about it. And even recently with like Bird Box is a good example where it's like everyone's hyping it up to be this scary thing, and I watched it and I was just like, this ain't shit. Like like whatever, like I was masterful over that. I was just like, this is like kitschy horror or whatever. Whereas I watched Heredity recently, and I'm like, that's probably the last horror movie I'll watch, just because it tapped too close to what I deal with normally, which is like spiritualism and like willpower and like incantation and all this kind of stuff. I don't dwell in the. I'm not a witch in that sense. I just fuck with astrology, and like I'm on the skirts of that world. But it made me like be like, I don't know. It was kind of like like little red flags where my spidey senses started tingling. Where it's just like, dude, if you look into this too much, you're gonna start like really second guessing your own like joys. Or like I find joy in astrology and I find joy in tarot. But if I think there's like some like demonic presence like moving the cards, or like I'll just be like, "Wah," like I'll freak out. So I really do appreciate what you said about that. Datura was a thing that I've heard McKenna talk about. He did in India, I think. Did you hear about that story?
Yeah, and I've used it too, man, and it was really,
Okay.
really.
I mean, it sounds like really far out. I mean, there's Vice had a really good like expose, I guess, a few years ago on the Devil's Breath is what they called it. I think that's how I knew about it. Basically, like in Colombia, where it was how I knew about it. Maybe it's in Peru, obviously. Maybe around in Ecuador where I am. Um, the idea is it's like a volitional. It takes away volition, and you
Mhm.
don't really remember. It's like a roofie almost, but you're like
Exactly.
cognizant.
It
So
is
it's
the date.
like,
That's literally what it is.
yeah. So, in the weirdest sense, oh, word, there was a trailer from the guy who did Heredity dropped today, Corey's saying, so I'll have to check that out because I appreciated it. It was aesthetically beautiful. It was well done. Like, I think it's going to be a classic in terms of spiritual horror kind of thing. Like, it beats Exorcist, like, hands down. Like, that stuff, it's a really well done thing, but it's the kind of thing where it's like, what the fuck did I just see? Like, like to me, I was just like, oh my God. Um, is there anything else you want to talk about? I don't know if you got to go. I don't know if you're getting bored. Like, I don't want to stretch the rubber band too far.
Well, here's the thing. So I hate driving in rush hour, and it's about that time now. So I really don't
Word.
care where this goes. But there is one thing that I did want to talk about really quick, just because it's sort of like I think it's a necessary conclusion to the topic of Chapel Perilous.
Okay.
Um, it is also a very touchy subject, but I'm gonna go into it with care. So I want to talk
Word.
about suicide. So a really close friend of mine. He was almost like a brother to me. We had like sort of a falling out like a year ago, but he recently killed himself like in December, and he was like a brother to me, you know. And he was a huge influence to my life. He uh, he was probably among the smartest people I've ever known, and one of the most like just truly delightful, like funny individuals. Um, and essentially, you know, when that kind of thing happens in your life, so when someone kills themselves, you just ask yourself, you know, it's like what would drive someone to do something like that, you know? Like how bad could it really have been? And I think honestly, like the most rational answer that I have to suicide is it is this sort of chapel perilous experience. It's
Totally.
when you realize that things are so fucked that there really is no better option than to just off yourself. And so the reason I'm bringing it up is because I just want to say to everybody who deals with these topics, there's a lot of reasons to kill yourself. There's a lot of scary shit out there, really scary shit, for sure. But killing yourself is like saying, like, if you kill yourself, it basically says, you know what? Good luck, guys. This is your problem now.
Yeah, it's very
You know what I
selfish. I
mean?
mean, it's tricky. It's
It's
on the
like
one hand,
the
I can see the
most
stoicism of it, right? Like, I get it in a way. I mean,
right.
I'm not suicidal now, but I'm surprised I haven't killed myself. Let's just put it that way. Like,
Oh yeah, too.
life's
There's
crazy.
some dark alleys, dude, and people like
Yeah.
less strong individuals might not have you know had the strength to stay
Mm,
alive. That's the thing. But what
yeah.
I'm saying is that ultimately, if you make that decision, it is a very selfish decision because what you're
Mm,
saying is like I don't want to deal with this shit, but like you guys can because like me killing myself isn't gonna change the fact that it's real. And at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And like
amen.
again, at the end of the day, like the whole Chapel Perilous thing, you don't really know. Like Robert Anton Wilson, who's like a high adept of the Chapel Perilous experience, he tells you that you know you don't go paranoid schizophrenic. Just go agnostic. Just say that you don't really know, because
It's
at
a
the end
lot
of the
easier
day,
or safer.
how
Yeah.
yeah. So like imagine like the pain of like your family and friends if you were to kill yourself. Then imagine what if you were wrong? You can't take that back, right?
Yeah.
Like
That's the reason I never did it. In all honesty, I think what happens is if people are in that state of mind, they're not really cogent or rational enough to be worried about consequences outside of their own actions for themselves. I
right.
mean, it's a very narcissistic kind of headspace,
It's narcissistic,
for
and
better or worse.
a lot of the time, it really is. You know, like it's hard to call someone selfish for killing themselves too, because sometimes it's almost like it's not even their choice. Like the pain is just so bad they can't even bear it. You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's where it gets weird. Like you know, like what is free will and all of that. We could have a whole fucking like 6 hour conversation about that
We
alone. But
should, yeah. But
yeah,
you don't hit rush hour. Do you want to bounce like right now? Or you got another minute to talk about this, or
no,
how are you feeling?
I think you misunderstood me. What I'm saying is that it's rush hour right now. So like for the
Oh,
next
so you got extra time.
yeah, for the next, well, I mean, I could go drive, but I'll just be making the same amount for driving like 3 times slower, if that makes sense. So
Word. All
happens
right.
less
Word.
paid.
Let's talk then. Like, I won't let you go. I mean, I'm down with this. In terms, okay, so I think I'm still a practicing Christian technically, but I'm a post Christian. I mean, or a post Christian Christian is the way I like to look at it. It's like I'm not exactly normal. and it might just be a phase, like a Jungian kind of thing I'm going through. I don't think he ever gave it up fully, you know? It's like, it works for me. I'm not going to proselytize. So I think one of the things, though, is a lot of people, if you've ever seen the movie What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams, um,
Hmm.
suicide in that film, it's a beautiful film if you haven't seen it. It's really well done. It's very, very surrealistic, artistic. You dig it. I'm sure you dig it. Right when CGI was kind of happening, so it's very beautiful, and not in like a cheesy way. But one of the parts of that movie, I mean, not to spoil too much, it's about death and like heaven and um, a person basically waiting for their loved one, but the loved one after they had died is overcome with remorse, sadness, and basically, yeah, it is a great movie, Faith. Um, Basically, she kills herself, right? And it's this whole journey of him going into hell to help her. You'd like it. It's a beautiful thing. It's very well done, and it's probably got a lot of high resonance in terms of just like um, film as a culted mirror or whatever. Because I think some films are like portals, if you want to put it that way, and then some movies are like entertainment fodder or whatever. So it's like, and there's a spectrum there. Like, so
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, I've walked out of
Well,
some
hold
movies and
on.
be
I
like,
just want to say also some films that you might consider entertainment, not like so much a portal. Well, that's a portal to somewhere else. That's a portal to like somebody's pocket, right? Some rich fucker who like
yeah,
figured out like what's gonna get you off tonight, make you feel like like entertained, and
yeah.
then
Like
that's just
Boogie Nights. That's a good film, but it's not gonna do much for me ultimately. For like, I say that there's a lot of heavy shit going on there, but maybe that's a bad example. But I don't know. It is kind of what it is. We could talk about films for a second, but I'll wrap up this idea with the suicide thing, being that in some contexts, the whole reason I'm saying this is like, is this unforgivable sin, where it's just like, this is the gift you've been given, existence being, and whether you think you've signed up for this or you just embarked and enjoy the ride. Um, it's a gift and a privilege to be conscious and aware. And even when we're over, like, even if we're at the fucking lowest of our lows and we're overwhelmed with the situation of existence and all this stuff, um, there's a burden of responsibility in being, to the degree that it's our responsibility to continue on, it seems. I mean, like most cultures are more, I mean, it gets tricky with like Japanese. They're like, yeah, Harry Carey, or whatever. Death is kind of viewed differently in different cultures, but most people view life as an embarkation, like something to be a part of, and not to like just throw away as readily as suicide tends to. That being said, I can see from the perspective of a suicidal person that there's this kind of like, I have no control over anything. This is batshit. The last control maybe I have is this, and it's like kind of a last stand, Custer's last stand in their own reality, or like the Alamo or something, where they're just like, well, you know what? I'm going to go down in flames, and I get to pull the trigger here. So,
right.
and then of course there's fireworks going. So it's a tricky topic, and I don't know
That's
if
why
we
we
want to
have
keep
all the
talking
Adam.
about it.
Sorry, I shouldn't have
That's why
said that.
what? I didn't hear you.
Okay,
What?
maybe that's better left unsaid. I think you can. I think you can go back and find that if you really want to.
Word. Okay, I will.
That's some
um,
weird shit for sure.
I want to know what you said now. I'm a curious bitch, so it's like, what did he say? Um, it's
Hey,
getting
let
dark,
me
so I
let
gotta
me
turn
just
some
say
lights.
let me say this too. So,
Yeah.
you like sure, it's really hard. Like, there's not much you can do. But think about this. Like, has anyone ever gone out of their way to give you something? Like, has anyone ever gone out of their way to empower you if they didn't have to? Like, what if they were struggling, and they still went out of their way to
Who's
help
not
you?
struggling?
Right.
Right? Like, we're all in
So
it
it's
together,
like,
even on that front.
if you're sitting there with a gun to your head, why don't you think back to that person that gave you that thing they didn't have to give you? And like, that alone is reason to keep on going, because that's
Yeah.
proof that that's proof that you have, like, you've been given the blessing. You've been given like the benefit of the doubt, like you are worth something to the world. And the fact that you off yourself ultimately is a symptom of unbearable pain, but there is no such thing as unbearable pain. Like, the thing is, if you didn't have a gun, if you didn't have a tall place to jump off of, what would happen? Like, you would still continue existing, and there's always a chance. And like, until, like, the thing is, death comes for everyone. And
Hmm.
like, it's going to come for you at some point. So why are you going to decide when that is, if you don't actually know if it's worth doing it right now? And the last thing I wanted to say on this matter is, sort of one of my favorite little like axioms that are created. And the idea is, as long as you still have your breath, you have everything. And what I mean by
Amen.
that is like,
Yeah.
yeah, you can literally be like tortured. You can be tortured, you know, and you can have all of your appendages cut off. As long as you have your breath, you're not gone. Like your breath is sort of to me like the last thing that you have, you know? And as long as you have that, then there is that potentiality, and that's what a lot of reality is, that right, like reality is half this like physical materiality that we experience, half of it is existing in this metaphysical plane called the imagination, or like, or you could even, from a physics standpoint, you could call it potential energy, right? It's energy that hasn't actually been exerted yet. It hasn't been it hasn't been turned into what we call kinetic energy, but
Mm.
despite that, it's still real, and physicists take it into account as though it's just as real as kinetic energy. So what I'm saying is, as long as you have your breath, then there's all this potential energy that you don't know about that could still potentially save you. And, you know, like let's say that you have all your appendages cut off, you're tortured almost to the point of death, but you still have your breath, and then by some miracle, and yes, there are miracles, there's plenty of miracles, like you could literally fucking, we could have a year long conversation just talking about all the different miracles that have ever happened, and we still wouldn't hit like even a fraction of them, right? Like
Right.
miracles are commonplace, actually. Miracles, they're rare, but they're also quite commonplace. And so as long as that's true and you still have your breath, then you could very well get out of that situation. You could very well be that guy without the limbs, or, you know, replaced by robotic limbs, or like put into some kind of crazy like augmented like
It's like
body,
Stephen
where
Hawking,
now
dude.
you're stronger than you were before, and now you can go and fucking get those people that tortured you and stop them from torturing other people. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
potential is
There's a lot to
endless.
it. A
But
few things came to mind.
if you make that decision to off yourself, there's no going back. That's it. So it's
Correct.
just
Yeah.
not worth it. That's the way I
There's a
see it.
finality to it. Correct. And the irony, I think, is like, I guarantee, I mean, I was gonna say I guarantee you, I'm not certain of anything, but it's like my opinion is that like we're eternal beings of spirit, and I'm not. We don't have to get into like dualism, because I'm like, when you were talking about, a few things got triggered in my brain when you started talking about like your appendages getting removed. There was I mean, there's a fucking, I guess, a short story that got turned into a movie that Metallica did a video to at some point, with a guy who's like wakes up in the hospital and he's got like nothing but his head or some shit like that. A modern version of that was, who was the guy who was Spider-Man originally? I forget his name now.
Tobey Maguire,
Yeah, yeah, Tobey
the
Maguire.
good
He was,
Spider-Man movies for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, the OG shit. But back in the day, he was in a movie that I forget what it's called, but it was about a guy who was in a train. Like he could, it was like crime solving, and he could see this shit. Like it was so surreal. Oh my God, what's it called? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? There's only two people in here, or whatever. They probably don't know. But basically, this movie was about, Toby Maguire was like in a time loop, and he had like basically like almost a Morpheus kind of voice talking to him and being like, "Look, you're gonna witness a terrorist attack, and you have to tell us like how this all pieces together." So it's kind of like a who done it. But spoiler alert: at the end of the movie, it's like you actually are a brain that's being kept alive, so we can ask you questions and get information out of you for perspective's sake. You have no body, and it's just like this weird like deterioration like of existence. It's like goodbye, thank you
Dude,
for your
you're not
mission.
talking about source code, are you?
Yes, I am.
With Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh, it was Gyllenhaal. Did they? Oh my God, my bad. Jake Gyllenhaal and Tobey Maguire look enough alike that I just fucked that up. Um, but yeah, Source Code. That
That
was a
movie's
weird movie.
yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of thing where that's what started coming to mind when you were like, even if you have your breath, it's okay. It's like kind of. I mean, at some point you start like losing your, like. There's the mind body issue right there a little, where it's like you're not your arms and legs, but Jesus Christ, life without them is very different. And like
Oh
if you
yeah.
start reducing it to a point of like you're just a pineal gland or something, it's like that's not worth living. I mean, fuck that. But
I guess that's a pretty good point, man. Shit.
it's all good. Yeah, I mean, I'd say like, okay, Jake. Oh, who was it? Jake Gyllenhaal. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's like Gyllenhaal. If you want to kill yourself, that's fine. But otherwise, nobody do it. And the other thing
I
that
guess.
kind of came to mind, fuck, there was a few things.
Hey, but what's to say
Oh,
that after they ran all those experiments with his brain, like maybe they would they they reward him in the sequel, and then he gets a new body or something. Who the fuck knows? There's no way to know, man. Like that's the thing.
Correct.
Like pain, at the end of the day, pain is just like a bunch of electric signals, you know. And like I think
And yeah,
ultimately the goal is to get to the point where you can decide like what pain is worth bearing and what pain you should just kind of turn off. And that's the thing. It's like it's not necessarily even possible to turn pain off, but it might be. I think that's what a lot of spiritual masters do. And you know what? The perfect embodiment of this is the perfect what's the word? Example. I forgot the word I'm gonna use, but it's those fucking monks, man, that would just burn themselves alive. How the fuck do you do
immolation.
that?
Oh yeah, dude.
Yeah,
You got to be in a weird
like
headspace for
that.
that.
That proves that you should theoretically be able to get to a place where you like your pain does not control you. Like the
Correct.
reasons that you do things are for higher purposes rather than just your own personal like experience. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know. I don't
That
know
gets
if
funny because I think those guys were Buddhist monks who were doing that, and
yeah.
like the Vietnam kind of like album cover or Rage Against the Machine's album cover or whatever. Um, yeah, the immolating monks was always a weird. And in Waking Life, there's a scene. I don't. Have you seen Waking Life?
Yes, for sure. I
Okay,
got
it's one of my favorite movies. Yeah,
yeah,
but
he
there's
also
one scene
made
in it.
the Philip K. Dick book film, um, Scanner Darkly. Have you seen that one in
Hmm.
the same style?
I
Yeah.
I've seen A Scanner Darkly. I haven't read it. I've got all of PKD's books and Robert Anton Wilson's books on my computer. Part of this Ecuadorian sojourn for 6 months is like I'm gonna read all Jung, all. I don't really want to read Crowley, but I've got a bunch of his shit. Like I've got all this stuff backlogged that for years has just been like I torrented it all, right? And at some point I'm just like, all right, well, I don't need to go to college. Like I'm at a point where I'm like, I don't give a fuck about that stuff. I want to know like if I can glean, enough from these systems and people's thoughts, I'll be able to jam on all cylinders for myself. I don't think I need a piece of paper saying I can do that. In any event, the shit. What were we talking about? I've totally lost track of mind. It was like the body Gyllenhaal stuff. This gets into Buddhism and mind body issues. Buddha was, I mean, I'm not a Buddhist, but I think there's a lot of value there. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a guy who's like, look, I've kind of woken up from the machine and I know there's an escape hatch. Let's see what we can do here, kind of vibes. Um, and his whole thing was like, life is suffering. Life is pain. We're in a veil of pain and tears and all this shit. And it's like, there's no escaping it. I don't even think in some way, suicide would escape it. Like, that's what I was saying earlier, whereas like, I can't say with certainty that like, I mean, maybe it is a materially reductionistic thing where it's like once you cease to be like Dawkins is right, like the lights off, you're done, the scene's over. But at some level, I mean, my presuppositions are such that um, I think. Have you ever read Narnia books by any
No.
chance? I don't know if you will. They're good. They're kids' books. You can rip through them like one a day. There's seven of them. You could read like the series in a week. It's good if you want to read it. If you don't, you'll be fine. Spoiler alert, hard spoiler alert. So The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I think you're aware of like the kind of the story. You don't have to be aware of the details, but it's like,
I mean,
oh,
the
you go
film.
through the films. The BBC did some really good films back in the 80s adaptations that are like Shakespearean quality. Check those out if you ever want to. They went through the fourth book as opposed to going through all seven. What Disney did was like a bastardization, and it's so pathetic. Like it was literally a call and response to the Lord of the Rings. They were like, talk about movies being made for like the portals of a dollar bill. It's like, oh shit, LOTR's making gang bucks. Like let's fucking do what's like. Oh, you mean C.S. Lewis had a story and they were like Inklings together? Yeah, let's do that. There was no continuity. Like it was crazy. Prince Caspian in one fucking movie was Spanish sounding, and the next he had a British accent. It was just like, y'all don't care about this. Like it was sad. But in any event, in that mythology in the world or whatever, the whole and this is a huge spoiler. So if you don't want to talk about this shit, or if you guys don't want to hear about this, like hit mute now. I'll talk about it briefly. But basically, the gist of the whole fucking universe of that world, like the Narnia world, is um, basically the kids who are in it takes setting at first in World War II in England where they're having to get like go to the countryside because the London's getting blitzkrieged or whatever, right? Or fucked with by Germans. And basically they're like, look, you can go to the countryside and be fine. Apparently, the idea here is they were on a train, and I don't remember if it's a train crash or a bomb hit them or whatever, but it's like you all died, and everything you've been experiencing is some kind of like trip of becoming in another like parallel. It's not parallel realities. It's like we don't know. It's almost like Inception style, where it's like we don't know what consciousness is, what doors and gates we go through when taking last breaths or whatever. Like it might be as something as simple as like like when you startle awake in a dream that you think you've been flying, like that could have been you dying in another reality or something. Like we could be dead right now, and like this could be my coming to terms with my death in a fucking weird simulacrum or whatever. Um, Point is, mind body, and this is kind of what I was getting with this. Like Buddhism kind of goes to this the at least from a peripheral standpoint, because for the record, I'm not a Buddhist. I don't know that shit. I've enjoyed it, but there's limits there. So I'm like, okay, it's cool, but I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid fully. Like I'm a theist. Like straight up, he's like, there's no God. So it's like, well, it's kind of hard for me to jam on that because our presuppositions differ greatly from the start. But the idea being, we are so much more than we think we are. We have, in a post-Descartesian kind of way, relegated ourselves to be like, oh, I have a mind and that's separate than my body, and I am a separate individual than the whole outside of myself. Like we've gotten into a very weird, philosophically driven, and scientific materialism, like scientism as such, has put us into a weird corner of existence now. That's why nihilism and existentialism even came around, I think. Like these things weren't going to be problems before because people were inherently superstitious. They thought there was an order to things. They weren't freaking out and thinking, I mean, suicide happened, I'm sure, but I think people thought there was consequences to that in a supernatural, superstitious kind of way, so they wouldn't even fuck with it. Whereas when you start killing God in a philosophical way, and there's no gatekeeper or whatever, and you're just like, oh, well, I'm the Napoleon of my kingdom. I can do what I want. I'm tired of this film. You're going to do a lot more dramatic and maybe disadvantageous things to yourself. Is there anything you want to talk about in terms of mind, body?
Okay, well, I
Do you do
wanted
it?
to talk about Buddhism a little bit, so
Let's do it.
let me just share this little it's a portion of the Cosmic Trigger by Robert Anton Wilson. Again, he's the Chapel Parallel.
Got to read that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you really do. It's a treasure trove. It's pretty much hits every nail on the head, almost every nail. But um, so there's this section where he's talking about his daughter. So basically, his daughter got beaten up once by like a gang of like,
Hoodlums or whatever.
and so she's like badly hurt, and her dad is like Robert Anton Wilson. He's like he's freaking out. He's like, are you okay? Like and he just notices she's not that upset. And so he asks her, like, why aren't you that upset? And she says, well, she's a really smart kid being raised by him. She says something that blows his mind. And she says, well, those kids were carrying like this karma with them, and they released it on me. But if I'm mad and I hold on to that karma, then I'm just going to keep it going. And so by
Mm,
not holding on to it, I'm actually stopping the wheel of karma. And
mm.
that blew my mind too. That's really one of the most interesting things I've ever thought about. And it's kind of messed up. It at an extreme level. It's a very
I think I
dangerous.
read Cosmic Trigger. Now that you said that, I've
Really?
read one Robert Anton book, yeah, and I think that was it. If it's his whole, I mean, this is hitting me. He was from San Fran, and his daughter. Now that you're saying it, it's just I was a really heavy stoner at that point, so it's like I barely remember it. But okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So keep.
So
So you're talking about the Wheel of Karma. Okay, so in the Matrix, like towards the end of the third one, that's kind of what Neo's doing, where he's like, I don't have to be getting up, right? It's like stay down or whatever, and he's like, I choose to get up, and it's like that's hitting, that's consuming and transmuting, if you want to put it that way, eternally. Because I guess the idea being like that he's just going to be in a feedback loop of this. I mean, in a weird way, that's what Christianity is kind of alluding to, where it's just like, look, this character is doing this on your behalf for you always, kind of thing, right? Like atonement or whatever. But in the Matrix thing, yeah, like when Neo's like Agent Smith kicks his ass. I mean, like right, like he's lost. He's like, you're clearly not going to win this. There's a billion of us and one of you, and you're fucked. Fuck you. Like give up and like suicide. Basically, it's like give up. And the idea there being like, as long as he could, he wouldn't. And that is whether that is I mean, those kinds of stories are what and galvanize humans. I think our species. We need those stories because if we didn't, we would I mean, we would be doing much worse things to each other. I mean, Nero would look normal. You know what I mean? Like we'd just be doing stupid shit like for the sake of it, and like Columbines and stuff like that would be more normal. I think the reason we don't have that as a more normal thing is because a lot of the myths and stories we've been telling ourselves. Um, because I think even though I participate in certain myths like Christianity or tarot and astrology and all these things, they're ultimately stories I'm telling myself to feed into and to like participate in or whatever. I don't know if they're all objectively ultimately real. That's I'll find out one day and see how the chips fall. But at some level, they're functional programming for me to jam on. Like you can have a like we're all it seems inherently hardware. Like that's what biology and everything is, unless you're a spiritualist and think everything is spirit, which I've jammed on before. Where it's like,
Well,
what's
what's
not grace? What's not divine? Like everything. This is a dream, a beautiful dream. Holy shit.
let
Um,
me can I share something with you really quick? So this is a
Go for it.
big sort of, I don't know, like potentially controversial view that I have. It might not be controversial, but it's just like, I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, but there's this idea that there's like a physical reality and then there's like a metaphysical or spiritual reality. But the way I see it, they're not really distinct. The distinction lies in perception. There's certain
Mm-hmm.
things that can be perceived and there's certain things that aren't as easily perceivable, right? There's certain things that you can see with your eyes, there's certain things that you can only really sense when you develop like a sort of like a mental construct that's capable of perceiving certain patterns. But the idea is, I don't think there is a distinction really. I think that, like for example, like we know for a fact that there's a bunch of invisible light that we can't see, right? Like there's parts of the light spectrum that are just invisible to us. It doesn't
Correct.
mean that they're physical and real, you know? And then what is physical and real? Like if you want to really get into that, like have you ever heard of a point particle before? Like
Not.
in quantum, I mean, so basically a subatomic particle, like so you have like an atom, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
an atom determines like the element, right? The combination of like the subatomic particles in the atom determine what element it is. You break that down, and then you have the actual subatomic particles, right? You got protons, and then they say protons are made of quarks, sorry, which are even smaller subatomic particles. But the thing is, when you break it down as far as we have managed to, if you're willing to trust like standard model physics, if you break it down all the way, and this is something that people don't really think about or talk about ever, there's really there's no mass in the way that we think about it. Mass is
I know
more
it's
like,
it's not nothing's there really. That's the whole
right,
holographic
they're
reality
points.
thing. Yeah.
They're points. Like if you were to
Mm-hmm.
take a quark, which is like, or an electron, which are like supposedly equally like small particles, if you zoom in on them and you keep zooming and you keep zooming forever, like there's never going to be a point where they start to like expand and then you can like look around and like see it because they don't take up any space. The particles themselves are just a point. It's a single point.
It's a
There's no
potential point.
dimension.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no
Yeah.
dimension to them. They're just a point. That's why they're called point particles. And what that tells me is that these traits like mass, which affect gravity and that sort of thing, um, they're more like properties of the point rather than like actual like physical
Domains.
dimensionality of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
particle, right? So it is very much in that sense. It is very much like a simulation theory sort of argument where it's like when you really boil it down, all the constituent parts of reality are really just single points, like on a graph that have certain properties and they interact with each other based on like the forces and whatnot. Um, so in that sense, um, they're really,
I'm way
yeah,
on the
they're really,
simulation theory, by the way. It's like we're at a point where it's like spirituality as such just didn't have the terminology through technology that we have to describe those things, but it's the same phenomena, essentially. I mean,
Mhm.
it seems like it's like, yeah, we're in a dream. Well, what's a dream? Okay, it gets like weird, but it's like we're in a fucking. When people say simulation, I think they get irked and they think it's like, what am I just like the Tin Man and like, am I just bit pixels or whatever? It's like basically, but don't let that bring you down. I mean,
Yeah.
it
If
it
anything,
is
it
what
should
it
have been
is.
more empowering.
Right, and that's where I think magic kicks in. I mean, magic is programming basically. It
Hmm.
seems. And when you
Exactly.
become aware of programming potentials and like that, you're like, I'm an operator, but I'm also a program. Like it's all you're a lot of things at once. Um,
Hmm.
you become initiated into the idea of, I mean, magic is will. Like, I mean, I'm not into Crowley much. If you want to talk about like occultism, if you're into this stuff, it seems like the whole point of esoterica as such is like you have to come to a point to understand what your will and mind and heart and all this stuff is, and then how to operate with it. And then it's kind of like Miles Davis said, like learn all the music theory you can, and then forget it, and then just jam. Basically, it's you have to like get like properties of being to a point, and there's and in a weird way. I'm not saying it's a bell curve kind of thing. It's like maybe there's some extreme examples, like Jesus was a young kid and he went to the temple and like he talked to the rabbis. It's like most people are not trying to hack the system at certain ages. It seems like there's levels of initiation, like Saturn return. When you're 28, you have like kind of midlife crisis or whatever, and it's like you start realizing reality is different. You take it a little more seriously, but before then, you're like a young buck who's just like playing with all the toys, and it's okay to do that because at that point that's kind of expected of the algorithm or whatever. um oh my god, there's so many different ways we could go down these rabbit holes, so it's like I don't know what you want to talk about, like how what kind of esoterica and occultism are you into? What flavors are you into?
Well, the one that I've mostly been interested in is sacred substances, just because I've sort of had a weird history when it comes to like mystical sides of reality. So like, I was always that kid who like, I mean, I was raised Catholic.
Hmm.
I considered, I was a self-proclaimed atheist at a very young age. I was like, I don't get what you guys are talking about. Like, I don't feel anything. Like, none of this stuff you guys are talking about, like this prayer thing doesn't seem to do anything. And then in the same way, like I started, like people were showing me like meditation and like they were describing these experiences where it was like, oh, like don't you feel like the energy and all that? And I never did. I was always like the one outlier, like like literally the one guy in the group who was just like, are you guys
I
like,
wish I had gotten your chart before this conversation because I'd be like, oh, you're just a fucking triple Virgo, of course, or whatever,
yeah,
but I don't know your chart. Anyway, keep going.
I am actually Virgo, but
Oh my God, are you?
yeah,
That's why we're jamming
yeah.
well, because I'm a Gemini and you're a Virgo. We're Mercury ruled, so it's like communication's gonna be easy, but you're gonna be the pragmatist, and I'm gonna be like the dumb kid dreamer or whatever. So I'm like, what do you think? And you're like, maybe, or
Well,
whatever.
but let me just say, like I stopped being an atheist because I found that spirituality wasn't just like a bunch of like mind control, which I thought it kind of was. I realized like it was mostly gnosis that led me to it. I'd say that's probably the main. Well, okay, so it was kind of at the same time. I got into the Gnostics and psychedelics, and psychedelics for me were the bridge. They were the thing that showed me, oh, there actually is like another dimension. There is actually another way of looking at things and perceiving things that's deeper and even more profound in this way that people have been talking about forever, like talking about God and religion and spirituality and all this stuff. Like it's real. It's just that for some people, like extremely rational people, it does require like some external help in some cases. I'm not saying it always does, but and then yeah, so
That's
that's
why I
the
like
big one.
psychedelics. They usurp the rational mind. I mean, it's like it or not, here's an experience.
Yeah, exactly. So then I got into the Gnostics. So it's really I'm a Gnostic for sure. That's my main one. It's and the reason I like the Gnostics is because they're just so accessible and they're so anti-dogma. Like that's their whole thing. And the whole
Hmm.
reason I was against religion was because of the dogma, really. But the Gnostics are like, like their fundamental thing is don't take our word for it. Like, really, don't. That's not what gnosis means. Gnosis refers to a specific type of knowledge that can only truly be attained through experience. So they're saying, here's like a bunch of frameworks. Like we've gone out, we've been collecting information from every like religious system around the world for, thousands of years. We've compiled what we believe to be working models for how to work on yourself and work on reality and do these things, but don't take our word for it. Like, here's a bunch of models. You can take whatever you want. You can try stuff out. If it doesn't work for you, fine. We don't give a shit. Like, you can leave. Like, we don't want your money. We don't ask for your
Yeah,
money. They don't
it's
care.
not a
They're just
power
completely
struggle.
neutral.
Yeah,
They're just all they're doing is collecting information and trying to share wisdom, but truly wisdom, right? It's not just knowledge. They're not just like lecturing you. They're saying these are tools that you can use to turn the knowledge into practice, and that is what wisdom is. That's true wisdom. And that's
it's applied
really
knowledge. Yeah,
exactly, and it's also embodied in living knowledge, right? Like that's really
like
what wisdom
praxis.
is.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like on one hand, like you can have a bunch of really interesting and powerful esoteric knowledge written down in books, and you can have these books, um, very pervasive in like 1,000 different libraries around the world. But at the end of the day, that still is not as secure in maintaining that knowledge as it is teaching a person how to perform that knowledge in their lives, and then having their literal physical bodies um, portraying and practicing and enacting that knowledge in real life. And
Embodiment.
that's
I mean, that's
really
what
what
we're
I
talking
think
about.
is
Embodiment.
fascinating.
Yeah. So McKenna was all about that though too, and that's why I loved him because he's like, look, experience is the primary informer or whatever he would say. It's like it's cool to I forget exactly his quote, but he's like, there's a lot of squirrely notions out there, right? There's a lot of people going down different rabbit holes, and I think that has a lot to do with genetics, karma, fucking culture, time, space. There's so many variables happening. I think it's an orchestration of beauty and some weird dance between co-creation of free will, like the power of God in us, and dynamics outside of us, like just causal situations. But even then, it's like you were saying, it's like the paradox of free will is maybe just something we can't comprehend as creatures at this moment, but maybe one day we come into a full understanding. Um, yeah, McKenna was all about. He's like, you don't. He's like, you think all this shit I'm talking about DMT is crazy? Do you have 5 minutes? It's like, why don't you try it? Like, you be the
I
fucking,
love that.
you be the arbiter of this stuff. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what we're coming out of. En masse, really. I mean, there's been a huge exodus outside of, uh, not, I mean, I have friends that my dad even has converted from Protestantism to Catholicism. So I think there's people who are looking for certain systems and find solace. And it's not incorrect. I'm not like, oh, they're naive. They need the crutch of religion. It's like people are on different wavelengths and doing the different things. So I respect it all. But it seems generally the zeitgeist these days has been en masse people saying, show me, don't tell me. Like I want to see this shit.
Right.
Like we are in a time where it's not good. Correct. It's post scientism, and that's what happens when we start breaking down the fundamentals of things, and you start seeing impropriety within the Catholic Church or whatever. When there's a real cognitive dissonance with a lot of things, a lot of people just throw it all out and just say fuck it. But because I think we're spiritual by nature, most people aren't just throwing it out to a vacuum. Like there's no such thing as a vacuum of consciousness. Like you're still going to be participating in a dance of being in new models or different models, and I think that's the beauty of it all. So in a weird way, like the Taoism, like I could see, it's so funny. You're smart, you get it. I can see the causal necessity of why certain petri dishes of culture ejected from themselves certain domains of thinking. Like Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism came out of the East for very specific reasons. Judeo-Christianity came out of patriarchal desert people tribes kind of from the Middle East for very real reasons. Like this is like they had different algorithms. They were operating on different cultural standards, and like their values were slightly different. I think there's a human experience to the degree that like I'm not like, oh, the East doesn't get it and like the West gets it. It's not quite like that. But I mean, this gets into Jung a little, and I haven't read enough of him. Hopefully I get a little more versed on it and we can talk about that sometime. But it's like we are experiencing an interior reality externalized, but everybody's interior reality being externalized simultaneously. It's like a solipsistic, like it's a solipsism, a group solipsism, essentially, in a weird way, where it's like you're on your own trip and nobody is ever going to experience what you are. Like you are necessarily, fundamentally, your own monad, your own sun, if you want to be like a Thelemite kind of thing. Like you're your own universe, right? But at the same time, you are, and it depends on how you want to deal with it. But it's like other people are equally as validly unique and sovereign and authentic and all this shit. So I'm rambling, but the point is, it's fascinating to see like to get an atmosphere took a lot of fucking things to happen. Like volcanic activity had to occur, condensation had to occur. Like the fucking water cycle had to start going for a long time for us to even have plant life. That's before animal life. It's like the fuck is going on here? In a similar way, it's a singularity kind of like graph, right? Like an exponential thing where it's like these forces have like you get the point, I think, where it's like on the time scale of the universe, we are at like the last fraction of a second of like human history is like so infinitesimally like nothing, and yet we think it's all there the bee's knees. We think it's everything there is and more. And maybe it is to a point because maybe consciousness has been guiding, and maybe it's always been in the mind of a mind kind of thing. So It gets weird. It gets so dicey. But I didn't really have a point. I'm like, the point is, um, the tributaries that go to the sea of where we are now, like Buddhism or industrial revolutions or human rights, or whatever, all these things. Where we find ourselves now is such a beautiful fractal, and I think what is happening now is people are turning on to that, like the conditioning and the limitations of culture that have like a lot made us basically live in fear and survive, like lower chakra shit basically, where it's just like, okay, if I don't have money, I'm not going to eat. If I'm not fucking, I'm not going to be happy, like all this kind of stuff. Like that's been driving our species for a little while, and we're coming to a point where, I mean, the word Buddha means awakened, right? I think we're all becoming awakened. We're all becoming Buddha. Like our Buddha nature is kicking in, and that's it's like the best goddamn time to be alive ever. I mean, it's the best and the worst times in that sense. It's like Trump is president. Are you shitting me? Like what? Like if this is my dream, what is causing that? Like what do I have to do with to cause that to be transmuted? But
Did you
I don't know. It's
watch
gonna be
the
good.
watch the last Chris Rock special on Netflix?
Uh, I don't remember. God, I don't want to push. Okay, I don't remember. No, probably not. But maybe if he was like much thinner and shaved, I think maybe I saw it. And I was just like, oh, is he like a vegan now? I don't know. We'll just say I don't remember.
A
Trigger
great,
me.
yeah, it's a great special. I highly recommend. It's funny. It's really informative. It's beautifully shot. Probably the most beautiful special I've ever seen comedy wise. But he touches on
Word.
some really interesting things when it comes to spirituality. So one of the things that he talks about is how basically God. This is going to be controversial. This is going to be extremely controversial. But
I'm
the
all
idea
about
is that
controversy, bro. It's all good.
yeah, the idea is so he there's two things I wanted to mention. So one, he talks about how God is not infallible, and I think this is
I might
self-evident
have seen this
because
special. I might have seen it.
yeah, because we are not infallible, and we are a reflection or like a we're like a designed by or whatever, like whatever cosmology or like religious framework. The idea is that if we're infallible, then God must be infallible. um and then the second thing that he mentions is sorry, what were you just talking about after you said we were all Buddhists?
We're Buddhas fucking waking up. It's a beautiful fucking thing. Like the fact that we can like look across the table and maybe not be driven by lower chakras in the same way. Like we have the opportunity to be fuller versions of ourselves, maybe more so than anybody in our pasts. Like I think that's a post 2012 situation, quite frankly. Personally, I think we've gone through a collective threshold and the potential. Not to say that there weren't quote woke people before, but it's like most people were being, and it's not to say that people that think they're awakened now don't deal with reality as such, but they're transcendent to a degree that they can laugh and have that Buddhist archaic smile or whatever. They're just like
Yeah.
word, or it's like Obi-Wan shit, where it's just like strike me down, motherfucker. You don't even know what's up. Like I don't like.
Well,
That's a
I remember
really
I remember
good.
the second
Go for it.
thing. So he talked because you brought up Trump and you said, we're living in this very unique special time where there's this thing going on, but then at the same time there's Trump and he's president. That's kind of weird. It seems to kind of contradict this whole thing. So
Surreal.
Chris
Yeah.
Rock, he has this great fucking joke about this, man. It's so fucking funny. I just but it's also kind of terrifying at the same time if you're especially if you're a Christian. So what he says is he's like, well, so we had Bush, and Bush was so bad that he gave us Obama. So now we have Trump. Trump is so bad that he's gonna give us Jesus.
Okay, in a weird way, I don't want to get into like apocalyptic stuff necessarily. Apocalypse just means unveiling, so I think that ties into the awakening, right? Where it's just like at some point we'll become aware that the kingdom of God is within, and we can manifest this, resonate, and then we can do these things in greater, quote unquote, kind of thing. I'm not expecting Jesus to come down on a fucking horse from the sky and lop off Trump's head with a sword or anything like that.
Right.
That's way too literalist. I mean, you see my point. It's like there's truth here, but it's also a text and it's also culturally fashioned. So be diligent and don't just drink all the Kool-Aid. Like use your discernment. But because I am a Christian still. But that being said, what you're saying there doesn't scare me at all because I think that's the kind of point in a weird way. It's like Jason Barrera and Alan Green, two friends of mine that are part of the Sync Book Press that I had mentioned earlier. I'll tag you in this post that just came out, but basically, or not post, it was a conversation they were having where they were talking about Osiris, and I mean, this gets into other mythology frameworks, so it doesn't have to be Judeo-Christian at all. But basically, like this plays a little into king kill myths of the golden bow. Um, I don't know if you're aware of that kind of mythology. I'm minimally aware of it, but the idea there being like the cycle to continue has to replace the king constantly, basically, and that's through death and all sorts of weird shit. I'll tag you in this, and I'll even post it on here. This weird, surreal thing that had to do with the basketball player the other day, Zion, whatever, having his shoe blow out and Obama being there. I mean, this gets into like all the world is a fucking stage, yo. Like straight up, we were in a movie of consciousness, and there's a lot more scripting going on and magic and weird, weird magic, high weirdness, if you want to put it like going on at all times. So the thing is like, if we want to start with Bush, because it's like, where does the fractal ever end? It's always been people inheriting kind of karma and flip flopping. But it's like this, I guess the Osiris and who's Set kind of situation where it's just like, look, you're king, and I take off your dick and throw it in, like now go fetch or whatever. Now you're dead, and you're gonna get resurrected and all like that kind of archetypal story has been going on at a lot of levels, probably for a long time. Um, I'm not going to do this justice, so even explaining this is going to be so hodgepodge, I shouldn't probably even attempt to. But the idea being Bush's shadow integration, if you want to put it that, like his shadow is Obama. Like the things that he's not like. Obama was almost not everything because it's like I think now the Testify Rage Against the Machine video. It's like there's no real difference between these politicians. Like they're all kind of cronies. They're all kind of part of the system. So I'm not really getting off into like that territory. But the idea here being, if we're gonna, I'll post this later and tag you, and you'll be like, okay, I see what you meant. That's much less convoluted now. Um, where Bush is doing certain rituals, because I think 9/11 was an occult ritual. It was a lot of things. I mean, it's planes hitting a building, it's a national tragedy, it's a lot of things. But at some level, I mean, there's just a lot of thelemic fingerprints all over it, basically. And I think there's a lot of hot, like white and black hat kind of warring going on, if you want to put it that way, guilds or whatever, vying for
A lot of
power of
money,
our attention.
dude,
Say what now?
and a lot of money to be made.
Oh,
But
shit
what?
tons. I mean, there's so much going on. Like, this is ironically another sync person, David Plate, goes on into like how the Twin Towers are kind of like the pillars of Joachim and Boaz, and we're watching the temple be destroyed again. It's like the market, like the World Trade Center. I mean, this is like a symbol. It was on television. It was at a point where like we could witness it as a collective, and like back in like the day, it's like, oh, we like people were hearing that the Civil War was over weeks after the fact and still fighting. It's like people weren't all on the same page. We're at a digital kind of headspace of immediacy with technology and media where we can be basically initiated through rituals that we are not even aware of en masse in real time in very new
True.
ways. So, um, not to go off on too much of a tangent there, but it's like Bush was this king. I mean, I'm not going to do this justice, but it's like he's the king. He's like the one in charge, right? And there's a lot of symbology going into the American Freemasonically funded built systems here. Um, and the shadow element is Obama, and that doesn't mean shadow like Obama's bad or whatever. It's just like he's the antithetical kind of equal opposite. Like Bush was standing for certain values, certain kind of things, certain party lines, whatever, whatever. Obama comes on, and his shadow is Trump. It's like whatever he's not addressing is being represented by Trump. So it's going to be interesting to see what the shadow of Trump is, kind of, because it's like, where do we go from here? Like what you're saying is like, I guess it would go to a
Terminator.
Christ, or like AI maybe is going to kick in at some point, and we just have like, we're like, fine, you take the baton, uh, Siri or whatever. Like, I don't understand. Yeah, I don't know where it
That's
goes
fucking
from here.
funny. Nah, you know what? It should be Joe Rogan, but also it. Do you want to talk about AI?
I will. Okay, this gets into presuppositions really quickly because if we're in a fucking dream, there's different consequences than if I'm like a materially bound thing, like carbon-based life form, and that's now the hypersentience on the plane. Like, you know
So
what I mean? Like,
let's
there's a
let
different
me
ball
say this.
games.
So you're a fan of Philip K. Dick, it sounds like, and one of his most famous quotes is, "Reality is the thing that doesn't change when you stop believing in it, or it doesn't go away when you stop believing in it." You know.
Right. Hmm.
So, I mean, I guess you could make the case that it's a very long, complex sort of dream, and that's definitely possible. But like, and I've also heard like, for example, the guy that sort of brought me into like the DMT world and showed me those paths and whatnot. He told me about a time that he smoked this like pink uh, Hawaiian shit, like pretty much top notch, like the best you could get. Um, and he says that he experienced 3 full lifetimes on alien planets. So like, if that's the case, I mean, you know, maybe it is a dream. Like,
Anything maybe goes. Well, even that terminology breaks down because it's like I think this matters in the sense that like we're participatory and there's cause and effect and all this shit. It's a lot more loose than we think. We've been conditioned by programming like gravity is real, but we're fine. Like what we're doing now is enacting. Okay, so let me put it this way: shamans had visions, and maybe visionaries like Joseph and all this stuff. People who have visions would think of things in terms, and like our dream states themselves are non-linear, like, defy logic somewhat. You know what I mean? We're getting to a point where we can in this, like right now I am talking through time space, like this is a magic mirror, if you want to put that mirror, mirror on the wall, summon blah blah blah, and like, oh, Maiko, here he is, like that. Like they used to have stories for this that showed, I mean, if it's imaginable, it's possible in my opinion, because I don't think there's much we because we're bicameral. I think this gets into weird biology kind of restrictions, but it's like, what's not imagination? Like even if we're talking about like 2 + 2 is 4 and getting very pragmatic with realistic things, quote unquote, we're talking about quarks and just fundamentals of reality, we're still having to envisage that with our imaginations to communicate that, to even agree upon these things. It's gnarly. We're in an imaginarium, but it is a consequential one. And maybe the further deep we get, I mean, maybe the nature of the fucking dream changes. So at one point, like I mean, when you're talking about reptilians and shit like that, I think we have a part of our brain that's reptilian. So I think that when I hear stuff about that, like, oh, the reptilian overlords, like those are people functioning from the inner parts of their brain more. They're not really functioning
right.
on the outer parts of their brain. That's maybe me trying to create a cogency for my worldview to not crumble. Like I don't want to think that there's like, you know, demon people at the fucking like, or whatever, like reptilian aliens. Like
Well,
that kind of just gets weird.
and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said that if you can imagine it, then it's the distinction between imagination and reality is very very thin, you know. And so
It's
that's
almost
why,
arbitrary.
yeah. And so that's the thing. It's like I'm not making claims about any evidence of like physical reptilian entities, but what I'm saying is that the human imagination is a very powerful, very real thing, and it manifests
Mm.
itself all the time. And if it wanted to, it could create a race of reptilians. And if time is, if the future is the same as the past, is the same as the present, like it's all just like another dimension that we can't perceive, and it's all already happened, and the imagination has already like run its course. And who knows like what is real? Like who knows what we created in the future and might be interacting with us in the past or something. But the point is that it's still malleable. Like even if it is, and that's another one of these paradoxes. It's like even if it has already happened, that doesn't mean that another thing can't also already have happened, right? So
Correct, like in a multiverse kind of sense. That's funny
sort
that you
of,
say that because I don't know if you're guilty of this because you're a Virgo, you ruled by Mercury, you might equally be guilty of this, but I tend to say things without necessarily, like I'll spit truth and then like come into the gnosis of that truth through a lot of time and process. So like when I was like in high school, I'm like getting into weed and shit like that and like tripping for the first time. So I would say things like, it's all already happened, we're just experiencing it. And like now I'm like, oh my God, I think that is the case or something like that. But I used to just say that with like, just kind of like fart in the wind stuff and just like, it's weird. Um, it gets tricky because we are, we, we, how do I even put this? In order to exist, you have to have an ego. So I don't think ego is totally bad. Like when like super hyper new age spiritual people are like, fuck the ego. It's like, that's your monad of being. You need a point of reference
right.
here, like to
Fuck the
operate.
imbalance.
There's a question for you. A question's been posed. Somebody in the chat. My friend Justin Height, who I met in Switzerland, where I was learning about Christianity and stuff. Can you read it? Do you want me to read it to you?
I don't see a question.
Okay, it says, question for Maiko. What are the grounds for the what are the grounds for the imperfect conception of God? If we are imperfect, wouldn't our conception of God be necessarily only in part?
Well, sure. I mean, that's the thing. We can't, if we're imperfect, then, and everybody kind of already knows this, that you can't trust your senses fully, and like you can't,
Hmm.
like we don't have an objective view of reality. So for us to call God imperfect, like we can't say that for sure either. But I think that's sort of beyond the point. I think the point that Chris Rock was trying to make is simply that if God if God were perfect, then we wouldn't be having the experience of sort of what's the word?
Entropy.
Well,
It gets into
mitigating.
presuppositions
We wouldn't
about it.
mitigate. We wouldn't be mitigating what's going on. You know what I mean? If it were perfect, then we would simply be enjoying or reveling or suffering. But instead,
Don't you
we're
think that's what the
we're
Garden of Eden kind of analogy is? Like at some point, I think we fell into consciousness in such a way that we started becoming mitigators of our own like free will in a such like the animal kingdom like I think death and entropy and everything has always been part of the system. Like to think that there was a point in like a Christian kind of worldview where it's like nobody stubbed their toes and women didn't menstruate and digestion, it's like it just gets surreal and naive really quick where it's like what is perfection? Perfection means harmony, I guess. And like they were in the Tao functioning with the grain, and at some point we, it seems, became aware of the potential to go against the grain. But even that, I've come to a place in my own ontology where it's like Lucifer and Prometheus are kind of the same idea, just looking at it from a different, like a light side, dark side kind of thing. Judas had to
right.
pull the trigger for Christ to be crucified. There's things beyond our concept that we can't handle. It's kind of like if there's a kid running into the street, you're like, don't do that, bad boy. Like you freak them out, you give them consequences, whatever. It's like ultimately they need to be aware of their sovereignty to know how to govern themselves in time space to not be run over by a car. They're not actually bad people or, or whatever. And you're threatening them with violence or, shouting at them and all this kind of stuff to get them in the place of where their consciousness is to react properly and not die or whatever. I think it's similar to that. It's like we were given stories and archetypes in order to govern ourselves at a particular point in our consciousness development. And I'm not saying those stories are absolutely obsolete, but it's like we've kind of outgrown some of these things a little. Um, so if that makes any
Well, let
sense,
me
I
ask
mean,
you
I can't go for it.
What if Judas didn't betray Jesus?
Somebody had to pull the trigger for that mythology to come to completion. If there's prophecy saying this is going to happen, this gets tricky because it's all circular logical in a sense. If you're saying, well, the book in Isaiah says this will happen, so I mean, it can be self-referential very quickly. So I understand the flaws here, but in order for that story to come to pass, I mean, it's a lot in a weird way, like Quetzalcoatl myths, like prophetic visions of other cultures, like that just came to mind where it's like fucking first contact with white or well, not white but European colonialism was prophesied by the native peoples of America, and it's kind of like Apocalypto if you've seen that movie where it's just like they understood the ramifications of where they were in the Tao very differently from their perspective, but they saw it for what it was. To answer your question, it's like I don't think, I mean, again, there's a film called The Last Temptation of Christ with what's his name? He was the bad guy in one of the Spider-Mans, the Hobgoblin. I'm spacing on his name. Um, he was just in a Van Gogh movie that's really good. Eternity's Gates. It's a really beautiful movie. What's his name? Willem Dafoe. Willem
Yeah.
Dafoe was in The Last Temptation of Christ, and the idea there being, spoiler alert, what if Jesus hadn't been crucified? Like, what if he had just like said, "No, I'm going to pass on this. Like, this cup is passing from me. Fuck that." And I'm gonna go have a wife and kids, and like the whole point is he gets to the end of his life, he's like, old man in a bed, shit, and like all of a sudden he snaps back, and it's just like he's on the cross. He's like, I saw the trip of what I could have, like the potential universe. I saw that rabbit hole. I saw that wormhole. I saw the whole thing. I lived it, and I thank God I didn't actually do this. Whatever. It's a weird movie, Scorsese movie actually, but the idea here I think is This gets tricky because I mean, I'm not an authority on this. I'm not the author of reality, so I mean, maybe I'm very wrong. But it seems, and the Matrix does a good job of this. It's like there's causal necessity, and things need each other. It's like Agent Smith needs Neo as much as Neo needs Smith. It's like they play off of each other. They don't have their identity outside of that dynamic. So it's like there needs to be a fucking savior, and there needs to be somebody to betray. You see, it's like in that model, it's like these things seem like causally
But only in
necessitated.
that model. Only in that model. And that's the
For
thing. It's
sure.
like when you are accepting that as reality, then you've already decided that that's necessary. But if you're willing to accept that that might not be the necessity, then there's a whole treasure trove of other potentialities that begin to occur. So I just want to share really quick one of my favorite Terence McKenna lectures that I've ever heard. So
Word.
tell me if you've heard this one. He talks about how we had this really weird, like sort of like a dream state kind of vision, and he imagined a world where a, there's this thing that he calls like he explains it in this really interesting way, like scientifically and also spiritually. And scientifically, he calls it a fractal soluton of improbability. Does that ring a bell?
No.
Okay, so
Uh,
essentially what he's talking about is Christ. So he says there's two worlds. In one world, Christ is born, and it sort of implies this intervention from an outside force, right? Like the was it the Holy Spirit that like impregnated her, Mary?
that's
I
the
think it was, yeah.
idea, but I mean, even that, I've heard some interesting theories. Go ahead.
But anyways, so in one universe, this intervention occurs. This divine intervention occurs where this being is born. It's Jesus Christ. In the other universe, it doesn't happen, and that's what he calls the fractal soliton of improbability. It's like a wave that hits the Earth, and then at that point in time, it like basically splits into two realities. And so he talks about it's just a vision that he's having, right? He talks
Hmm.
about this alternative reality where Christ never happened. And so this is kind of anti-Christian, so don't take
I'm
offense
not
from this.
freaking, don't
Again, I'm
worry. Nah, dude, I'm not
it,
easily offended.
right on. So he's just saying basically what happened in this world is the Dark Ages never happened, and because of that, the Western world basically uh, they got a lot closer to like a Renaissance sort of event a lot earlier, like 1,000 years earlier. They also started exploring the the rest of the world a lot earlier. And so he talks about this. He talks about this potential that basically like the Europeans would have gone over to like the Americas much sooner, like 500 years earlier, and they wouldn't have had this like extremely masculine religious framework behind them. So they would have interacted with the natives much earlier and in a much different way. And the way that he's talking about them interacting is in such a way where they basically, instead of like subjugating them, they actually have a much more
Participate
friendly
with them.
relationship
Yeah.
and integrate knowledge. And so he's basically saying, like ultimately what he's trying to describe with this idea is that he sees reality like there's all these there's these weird entities, there's these weird like anomalous events, UFOs and that sort of thing. So what he's saying, he's just basically positing this theory that maybe what happened is like time split in two, and these entities that we're interacting with are actually from another dimension, and that other dimension is the one where Jesus never existed. And so
Hmm.
in that dimension they were like far more technologically advanced, far more like socially stable, and because essentially what happened is they integrated the ancient European culture and technology with the ancient American sort of native technology that has to do with shamanism and like the psyche and psychedelics. So what he's saying then is in this case like it actually, I mean, he's making the case that the whole Jesus thing actually kind of slowed us down. And I don't
I
know.
hear what you're
That's
saying.
the thing.
I mean,
I
the only thing that came to mind immediately was like, I mean, as much as I don't love Western patriarchal militancy, I don't think Christianity was that in its essence. What happened is like culture became quote Christian, so we start convoluting a lot of things. It's like Constantine and on is like it's like fucking AT&T is it's like it's not it's a corporation of it's a power thing. It's and that's why and even beyond that, it's like a lot of it's weird because I think a few Norwegian like there's like Viking kind of things in the middle of America. It's just like wait, people were over here it seems. Slash a lot of the immune system situation was unforeseeable. It's like there was just a conflict of immune system. Like, well, a lot of the pathogens that the Europeans brought over, like, wiped out entire civilizations. That doesn't have anything to do with Judeo-Christianity,
Right.
particularly. So, I
Right.
mean, I love Terrence, but he tended to be like very smug towards Christianity in a way. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't think he ever got it, from the inside out. Not to say that like I get it or whatever. I'll tell you a really quick story if you want to hear a DMT trip. I mean, this is one of the reasons I haven't let go fully, and maybe if I do ayahuasca or smoke DMT again, because it's been 8 years, um, it might change. I was in a different embryonic phase of my becoming or whatever, and I needed these stories. So, and you had said that you were not sure if you'd broken through or whatever. Compare this with your notes, and you could tell a story if you want of any of your trips on Deemsters if you want. If you don't, that's cool too. So I'm actually gonna readjust because I don't know how much battery I have. See, let me get my shit together.
Hey, I'm sorry about
Oh,
that.
this is fascinating. I'm really glad that we did this. I mean, I know it took a little canoodling or whatever to get our schedules aligned, but I'm glad that we made it work because you're a cool cat, and I would love to have more conversations with you. Like clearly,
Likewise.
this is flowing easy, and we're talking about everything under the
Mhm.
sun in a rather non-obtuse way. So I feel like this can help others if they choose to watch it. Whatever, whatever. All
Yeah.
right. So
Uh,
basically, about what?
did I just go offline or?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I have
well,
no
I
clue.
got a ride request, so it kind of turned you off. And last time that happened, last time I tried to switch it, it like ended the call. So I just assumed that I got disconnected, but I didn't hear what you just said.
This has been good. Basically, I was like, I need to move because my battery might be dying. And that's why I just did my little walk and shit. But I was just kind of saying I'm gonna tell you a DMT trip. You can say one if you want. I think you heard that part. And then I was just saying I'm appreciative of the fact that we made this communication happen. We've been kind of playing phone tag and communication tag, and it would today Mercury, the Sun, and the Moon are in Pisces. We're about. I mean, it's like a Taurus just entered fucking, or Uranus just entered Taurus. There's a lot. The retrograde starts tomorrow in Mercury. There's a lot going on in the zeitgeist in terms of the cosmology. So I think even just the nature of how our conversations flowed has been very um, porous and watery and move a lot of movement. I mean, we're not sticking. I mean, it's like peril. This is a peril chapelist thing or chapel perilous thing in and of itself. Like you guys could choose to listen to this or not, right? So okay, I like I said, I'm prefacing this with the fact that it's in 2011, and maybe my consciousness is in a different place, so I don't know if I would be having these experiences now, like that kind of thing, right? So it's like this trip happened then, and maybe it's an eternally true thing, but maybe it's temporally sensitive. Maybe it would be different if I was to blast off again. But back in 2011, November, um, I had lived in Hawaii for 2 years prior to that and been basically getting into alcoholism pretty hard and just living a hedonistic party boy life, fucking whatever, drinking, smoking, eating, whatever, just doing whatever, basic life. I mean, fun, but like very self absorbed, hedonistic kind of reality. And which is fine if that's what you all want. I'm not judging. But for me, that was starting to like run dry. Um, but I wasn't out of the. I was still in that mode when I came back to the state, like mainland, and I went back to Richmond, Virginia, which was where I'm from, and I was delivering pizzas, um, and selling weed basically, and just drinking beer. You know, like just chilling, like not giving a fuck.
Mhm.
Um, and basically, I went to my dude one night, like, he had given me a quap or whatever, and I was like, here's your money, give me more. And by the way, I want something a little stronger than weed. I wasn't into LSD at that point because I'd had some weird experiences in high school, so I wasn't all about that, and I wasn't into I mean, basically, I was like, I want something stronger than weed, but not weed and not coke. Clearly, I don't need like an upper. And yeah, so it's like, what do you got? And he's like, oh, here's some crystal DMT. And it was like orange crystalline shit in the bottom of a first aid band-aid kit that he had taken to a concert or something. I don't even know what's going on there. Oh yeah, and it's a new moon. Emily Foley is saying. So there's a lot of interesting energy. I was born on a new moon, so like here we are. This is why this is all happening. Not why, but the planets have aligned for this conversation. Anyway, So dude is like, yo, if like I took these Deemsters to a concert, you can have whatever's in here, like go for it, for free, which is cool. Because I'd heard some McKenna lectures at that point, so I knew it was like the Mount Everest of psychedelics, but I for some reason expected something more like a mushroom trip. Basically, I don't know why. Anyway, dude gives me this amount, like a probably 2 or 3 tenths of a gram in retrospect, and I go home and I'm like, I put in Philip Glass because I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna like, I know it doesn't last long, but it's gonna be this like quick thing, right? Not so. Basically, I go home, put it on some weed, and I remember McKenna being like, take the third hit. Like I was like, I don't have much. I'm just gonna inhale the shit out of this and hold my breath as long as I can, kind of thing. Um, so I toke it, tastes horrible, like mothballs or whatever, and I'm just like, I'm not letting go. Like this is all I got. Like this is a one shot deal. And as like T minus 2 seconds, it's like I could tell. It was almost like degaussing an old computer screen. I could just tell like something electromagnetic was happening. Basically, is the best way I could put it. It's just like, oh, here it comes. Like I could just tell. And from the base of my perceptible like reality, I think it was auditory, but I mean, what is perception? I heard like a tone, basically just being like, and that's blasting off in my opinion. So, and basically, as soon as it gets to the highest pitch point, I'm looking up and I see this on my ceiling, like a Sahasrara chakra, like a million lotus petals, like being like, and I blast through it. And I'm just like, whoa. And I'm basically, I kind of come to, and I have this moment. This is like T minus 10 seconds. I'm like, it's almost like Alex Gray paintings where it's like everything is everything. You could see through everything, like all, there's a lot going on. You could just kind of perceive lots of layers of reality, like differently than before. And in the weirdest way, I felt like I was awake for the first time. Like I was like, oh, whatever I used to be in was a dream, and this is the real thing. Like this is the hyper reality. But anyway, I'm looking around my room, and basically, it's almost a double exposure kind of situation. I'm in my this is all open eyed, not closed eyed, sitting like nicely calmly. I'm by myself in my room. I should have probably had a trip sitter in retrospect, but anyway, I'm all open eyed, not knowing what to expect. Um, my room is my room, but over top of my room simultaneously, like I said, a double exposure, is a holographic layer of like a temple, like an Egyptian kind of temple. And it's not got hieroglyphs that I can recognize, but it's like deeply etched, kind of like ancient writing. And I'm just looking around. I'm just like, what the fuck? Like it's very real, but it's also very surreal. So I'm just like, okay, this is not a mushroom trip. And the weird thing about DMT, for those of you who haven't done it, most substances tend to alter perception to the degree that you're like, I'm wasted or I'm tripping or like it's affecting your biology in a specific way. I was stone cold sober. Like it's just like stargating essentially, right? Like to me, it was just like, well, I'm in a new space and I'm as stone cold sober as I was before, but now I'm in like I've stargated or whatever. Um, so I'm looking around my room and this is like a temple basically, and with hieroglyphs like hewn in my walls, but like not my walls, kind of simultaneity. And all of a sudden, this Mesoamerican frog, like a Mayan or Aztecian kind of like amphibious looking thing, like with a hat even. It's strobing black and white, and it's like as real as my fucking. I mean, it's real. It's not like a figment of my imagination. This is where it starts getting like I'm like checking my pulse. I'm like, am I dead? Did I just go crazy? Like, what is going on? So this frog that's like strobing like that fast comes up to me and is like, "You're not dead. Stop freaking out," basically. And which is funny because Joe Rogan's talked about this since then about like meeting Buddha or whatever. But this is 2011, so I hadn't heard his trip yet. But anyway, this frog is like, stop smoking so much, you're killing yourself. And at this point, I was smoking like a quarter a day kind of thing, just like ripping through weed. Um, and then it just disappears. I'm like, what the fuck was that? And I've talked to a friend since then who's like, the animal you meet on DMT is your spirit guide. Like that's what that is. So I'm like, oh, I'm a Gemini air with a lot of Cancer and Taurus, like Earth and Water. It's like an amphibious creature. Cool, I can jam with that. I don't think it was Keck or anything necessarily, right? But like, I'm like, cool. I don't know what this is. Like, was that an actual thing? Was that a Jungian projection? Who knows? This is where it starts getting weird. This is where the Judeo-Christianity kicks in. Um, so I'm sitting there and I'm like, it's ineffable. I mean, you understand the DMT space where it's just like, it's words aren't going to get the colors or the feel or any of that articulated properly. It's very, very weird, distinct flavor of reality, like an electromagnetic kind of situation. And I'm looking around the room and I'm just feeling my heart and being like, am I dead? Like I'm not freaking out, but I'm just like very perplexed as a Gemini. I'm just like, what is going on here? This is beyond logic. And all of a sudden I look in front of me and, well, at first I look over to my right and there's like these energy balls, like sprightly, like blue balls, maybe 6 or 7 of them on my bed, in my room that I'm looking at. And they are like animated. Almost, I imagine if I'd focused on them, it might have been like the, the machine elf balls of light type shit. Like, I don't, but I didn't focus on them. Like, I was looking at them and then my attention immediately went over to the Egyptian deity standing in front of me 10 feet tall, with the body of a man and the head of a bird, Thoth-esque. And it was this brooding, Saturnian, linear, no fucking around, like serious energy, masculine energy, right? Like that was the archetypal vibe. And I'm just like mesmerized. And it's like basically it became aware, like I'm staring at it. And as soon as I became aware of it, it became aware of me and its presence or whatever. And all of a sudden it starts scanning me up and down psychically, like reading me like a fucking barcode, genetically, everything. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm being read. Like I'm being scanned. What the fuck? This is beyond my pay grade. I can't do this back to this guy. What the fuck is going on? I'm not freaking out yet, but I'm starting to get a little antsy, sweaty palmed, you might say. Um, and all of a sudden, to my mind, psychically, like not out loud, this Egyptian thing, to my mind is like, so you're a Christian. And at this point in my life, I wasn't really practicing Christianity. I was drinking and smoking and doing whatever I wanted, and I wouldn't have called myself a Christian, though culturally I was. Um, so I didn't really respond at first. I'm just sitting there like, is this happening? Is this really like what is going on? Like nobody told me this was going to happen. Like nobody prepared me for this. Like what is happening? And I'm just not responsive basically. And this is T minus like 30 seconds to a minute, right? So it's like he kind of impatiently, energetically is like, throw your gang sign. Like, and I know you're a Christian. You have to say this. And all of a sudden, from the kind of middle of my gut, like I spit out some Christianese, which is like Jesus is Lord or whatever I say. And at the moment I say that, it kind of assents to the fact that I've said like the password or whatever and kind of backs off. And simultaneously, when it's backing off, the equal opposite energy, a nonlinear, electric, Isis, feminine, rainbow, feather thing, like the exact opposite, like not brooding, like full of joy, like, you know, like yin and yang shit. Um, this female angelic thing or whatever, Isis type thing, pops up and is like, ding, 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 that's the right answer. And it cuts into my gut. Like she comes into my gut, into my body. And from the base of my spine, I had a Kundalini awakening basically. From the base of my spine all the way up, I feel my chakras being like, doo, 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 and opening all the way up. And it was so much of an orgasmic electric joy feeling that I've never had on sex or drugs or any other thing. I mean, it was a Kundalini awakening, that I rip off all my clothes, like reverse Garden of Eden style, basically, where I'm just like, why am I wearing clothes? Like, I don't need that shit. Like, why am I, you know, like my essence doesn't need to be clothed. What is this? Or whatever's happening. And basically I start coming down at that point. Like it's over. It's like 2, 3 minutes, whatever it is. And I'm starting to come down and I'm sitting there looking up at this like red throbbing kind of like root chakra orbish thing. And I'm just sitting there like gnosis, talk about gnosis. It was not like it was not an intellectual ascent. It was a gnosis of the spirit at a level that I can't quite articulate. But it was like God looks at me as perfect through the work of Jesus Christ. Like God looks at me as perfect. What the actual fuck? Like, and I'd never thought that. Like I'd maybe thought that as a Christian and like, oh, I'm forgiven and God loves me. But it's like, no, I know what it means to be like approved. And I just was like beside myself. I was rattling with ecstasy to the degree that I'm like, well, if I jerk off, I'm gonna ruin this. Like I just didn't know what to do with the energy in my body. I was just like, holy shit! Like it's 3 in the morning and I'm alone, and I just saw angel demon gods. Like what the fuck is going on? It was so weird. Like for the next week, I'm just like talking to all my coworkers. Like Valhalla is probably real. I think I was in the Hall of Mott. Like you know, like trying to piece it all together, just being like, what was that? Go back to my dude a week later. This is the second and last time I did Deemsters. Go back to my dude. I'm like, bro, hook me up with more of that. That was the most profound fucking event of my young adult life. Hook it up. And he's like, yeah, have the rest of this. Like, that's all yours. Gives me as much, if not more, than last time. And I'm like, word. I go home all sweaty palmed and just like, I kind of know that I'm going to go into another universe or whatever. It's like, I kind of know the game now. And I'm like, a lot more nervous, like McKenna style, apprehensive. I'm like, oh shit. Like, do I really want to do this? I guess so. And I smoke it, blast off again. Not quite as an elaborate kind of like entrance into the whole new domain. Basically, I find myself in this kind of a combination between the Matrix architect scene, where it's like I saw like basically a mantid be okay. It's a combination between the architect scene and like Mickey Mouse's The Sorcerer's Apprentice or whatever. So it was like this warlock mantid being, like a wizard, like a mantis, like a praying mantis type thing, like a bug or something, um, dressed up in like warlock gear, fiddling with tubes of reality that I, for some reason, like, because he wasn't aware of me quite yet, and I was like, he's controlling or influencing time. Like for some reason, I was like, this is okay. I could just sense that, like my intuitive that. I don't know if it was the case. And as soon as I start becoming aware of his presence or whatever, like I'm kind of manifesting in his reality. He looks over, snaps his bug ass head at me, and is like, "You said you were a Christian. You said you're not supposed to be here." And I just kind of like it's like getting cock blocked out of a like heaven or something. Like it made no sense. I was just like, "Oh yeah, 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 yeah. God help me! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" And I just sat there with my head in my hands for like the remaining 2 minutes, just like bugging out, being like, "I will never do this again. I don't know what I'm like. What have I done? What have I done?" Like it was a weird vibe. It wasn't like evil, but it was just like it was like do not pass go. Like you cannot like what are you doing here? And I've heard people talking about that with DMT experiences, like not being allowed to get back into that space or whatever. And I haven't done it since then. And I've wondered if that was like, was I getting a weird second trip because I had experienced the gnosis of my fucking poles, of my duality, or my anima and animus, or whatever. Um, the first time, so I got the lesson, and it's like, oh, you're back in the classroom so soon? What the fuck? Get out of here! Like, I don't know if it was like a prohibition for all time, or like just like, hey, you did this within 6 fucking days. What are you doing here? Like I was shell shocked, and ever since then, I've taken quite seriously. Like, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't said I was a Christian the first trip, right? Like, it just kind of came out, and I was just like, Jesus. And then I had the Kundalini experience. If I had been like, nah, fuck it, I don't need that guy, like, it could have been a very different trip. So it seems like a very important myth to me still. Obviously, it's ingrained in my psyche. I don't know if that's me working through programming at a very psychedelic intellectual level. Like, I don't understand. I don't think anybody understands what dimethyltryptamine is or does. It's the mysterium of all. It's the spirit molecule. I mean, I'm not going to go start a cult and be like, I met God or I met, it's like, it's not so important that I like run around beating my chest proudly about it. But I think when I relay this story to people, they're like, that's a pretty intense DMT trip. Like a lot of people aren't hitting that level of contact or whatever. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but even in the Spirit Molecule movie, there's one guy who's like, if you do this shit, you can go crazy. Be careful. I realized I was an atom in the body of God, or whatever he was talking about. Um, so all that being said, I've wanted to do ayahuasca for a few like for many years, and it just hasn't manifested. It's always been like a $2,000 trip to Peru. When am I going to do that? Because I'm not trying to go do it like with some hipsters in a fucking Brooklyn apartment. Not that
Yeah.
that is bad, but it's like I think this shit has, you know what I mean? Like I think it's sacramental to the degree that it's like there's probably better and worse ways to do this. So the fact that I'm in Ecuador now and I have a friend who's like, I know shamans, they're cheap. It's like $30. You want to do this? It's like, all right, well, my birthday this year is on a full moon in Sagittarius. It's like, talk about some portal openings. Like, maybe I'll do that. Um, anyway, that was long winded. Thanks for bearing with me. Um, Emily says, Archon, you say, yep. See, I have no clue what's going on. At some level, I'm very okay with it being a Jungian like, if that was my inner psyche being represented externally and me, like, kind of playing with it in a vanilla sky kind of way, cool. That means I've told this to somebody who's a tarot reader, and he's like, dude, look into Thoth, look into Odin, look into Ganesh. You've got some connections with these higher, like these are your higher selves. This is you in another dimension or whatever. Not that I am Thoth, but it's like you've got connections to this shit. That's why you're experiencing this shit. So I don't really know what to do. Everyone's got a different kind of take on it. And you know how opinions are, everyone's got a butthole, everyone's got an opinion. So it's like, I guess I could listen, it's like, whose do I value over others? It's hard to be discerning with this kind of stuff. But have you experienced anything quite like that? Or what are your trips like? Because you've done a countless amount apparently. And it's like, I knew I broke through because it was so fucking ineffably weird. Like it was like, oh, whoops, I'm not here. I'm in the ninth D or, whatever. It was like, I knew I broke through. What are your trips like?
Well, pretty similar, I guess. Although I've
Word.
never encountered an animal. Um, I've never really encountered anything that I would say is animal-like. The entities that I've seen are almost always they're pretty similar, but they kind of differ between these two extremes. So on one hand, they are either like actually made of fractals and they are fractals and they are like almost interconnected and you see like a net of them like
So like
surrounding.
a Alex Gray painting kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. um, but even more fractally, like way more colorful, like strange, just immersive,
Ineffable. I hear you. Yeah.
like multi-dimensional. Like definitely more dimensions than the three that we're used to. And then sometimes they kind of look more like just like skinny, like Tron alien people or something. I don't really know. But yeah, I've never encountered like something that I would consider to be like a particular deity. It seems like I have interacted with God in that sense, where it feels like all of them collectively are God, and God is like taking this multi-dimensional, like multi faceted form. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, ultimately I don't really know. I think what DMT does, if I had to get posit my theory, I think it hyperactivates the imagination. And like I said
Hmm.
earlier, I don't find like the problem with that is like immediately people are like, oh, so it's just like some shit in your head. No, I think again, like I said earlier, the imagination and reality have a much, much more intimate connection. And I also believe that the imagination and like the mind itself, even like each of our consciousness, and this is what they mean when they say that our consciousness doesn't just live in our head. I believe that our consciousness really is something that is like it's an integrated circuit between the brain and the external reality, which is essentially just like a bunch of signals that you're receiving from other people, the world, like symbols, the feng shui or like the architecture of your environment, like all of these things are sending signals into your brain, and your mind and your imagination is not inside your head. It is the interfacing between the two.
Hmm.
And I truly believe that these entities that we are perceiving are not just inside our head. I think that they are a collective, sort of like the Akashic records sort of thing, like a collective archetypes. It's like a collection of different collective archetypes intermingling with your personal archetypes. And so that's why people like
Hmm.
there's certain similarities between trips. There's also certain differences, right? Like similarity
Correct.
wise, people almost always see entities, right? People
Hmm.
almost always have this profound sense of reality, like what they're perceiving is far more interesting and powerful and real than real life, right? But then there's differences. Like you see bugs and you see frogs, and I see fractal looking guys. My friends have seen bugs too, so that's kind of interesting. I've heard a lot of bug trips actually. So it's
Right.
weird, trying
It's
to piece
very
it
bizarre.
together. I can't say. I think that the imagination it plays a much larger role than we realize. It's far more important than we realize. So it's not downplaying it to say that that's ultimately what this is doing. I think it's
I don't look at it
hyperactivating.
as a cop out. Yeah. Well, you don't have
Yeah,
to caveat with like, oh, like when you say it's the imagination, that doesn't like deflate it for me. I'm like, I didn't. What's not imagination? So in some way, I really do appreciate what you're saying. With it's like some hyper meta, not even self nexus necessarily, but collection of interfaces, maybe multiverse, multi-time, whatever. Like all this shit going on as a static background, and how that interfaces with us is going to be strictly based off of my experience, my culture, my beliefs. Like, I mean, I think that's what kind of governs the flavor of the trip, if you will. So, but it gets weird because um, I had mentioned this trip story to a woman named Isabella, who's like a high. I mean, she's out in Sedona. She's a spiritual kind of guide and does out of just. I mean, check her out on my Facebook if you want. But she's a friend of mine. But I had told her about this, and she a few nights later was like, in my dream, I was passing a manted being, and it said it was you from another, like it's you, an aspect of you in another dimension or whatever. And I'm just
hmm
like, I mean, at some point, we're hitting walls of fucking phenomenology. You know what I mean? Like at some point, it's just like we have to, it is what it is, or it's not. Like I mean, this is all metaphysical, so it's all speculative to a point, all that jazz. What up, Stacy? Oh, she's the chick I gave the astrology reading earlier.
Nice.
Anyway, yeah, Stacey, you just missed my interesting DMT trip. You might really want to watch this conversation. But it's on the one hand, I think I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill where it's like it's everything, but it seems like it's like what you're saying, where it's a hyper imagination. So it's not just imagination. It's like it's I mean, the Arcade Fire song "Everything Now" is coming to mind, where it's like everything at once being articulated in a way that you can process it. It's like, what is the burning bush? What is, like, what is this stuff? It's like, it's the ineffable articulating itself in temporality and being accessible to the human psyche given where they are or whatever. Um,
Can I share
anyway,
my favorite, just really quickly, my two favorite smoking DMT experiences that come to mind?
for sure.
So the first one is really fucking funny. Like I've never had a trip that was more funny than this.
Okay.
I, um, so
Was it like
basically,
early
I
on?
was
Like how, in your experience with Deemsters, or DMT rather, how much, where was this in your career of the use?
it was probably in my first 15 trips, maybe my first 10. But
I'm wondering if that
so I
impacts it a
basically
little. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it probably does. And I can tell you how it's shifted over time because now I don't actually, I mean, I haven't smoked in a while. And now every time I have like a full trip, I actually purge, which is pretty interesting. I've never heard it happening to anybody except one friend of mine recently. Um,
Like
but
vomit?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
like
word.
a very intense, like ayahuasca-esque kind of experience, but there's nothing coming out. It just feels like energy coming out, like I'm purging energy, right? And
Hmm.
just to wrap that up, it's actually really interesting. And I made an art piece when I was in college for this, where I was like laying on the ground in a hazmat suit, and connected to the gas mask was like a tube that went up and like connected to the mouth of like basically an elf, like a DMT elf or a machine elf,
Okay.
I should say. That was like standing over me and like all black light painted. But yeah, so when that happens, like it feels like what's happening is like there's the DMT world, and then there's my physical body, which is my world. And when I'm purging, it's almost like it's half purging and half like, what do you call it when you're breathing so like intensely that you're like making like a really intense sound? You're like
Wheezing?
heaving, yeah, weaving. I don't know. I
Wheeze?
think heaving.
Okay. Okay.
But so it's like when I am purging, I like heave like really loud outward, and it feels like the DMT world slash entity, because it feels like they're one and the same. It's like a reflection of me, and it inhales, and then it exhales toward me, and then I do this really loud heat inward, and then it inhales. Yeah, hyperventilating. Yeah, very much like that. But it felt like I was exchanging the energy between the two realities, between the two dimensions. It was really interesting, and I was like the
It was
conduit, or like,
funny though?
well, no, that's my purging. That's why I
Oh,
don't
okay.
smoke
I was
anymore.
like, how is this
Now it's like
funny?
very,
Yeah,
and the
okay.
funny thing is like, it's actually really profound. Like the purging experiences are far more profound than the trips without them. So I actually do appreciate them. They're just so fucking much. Like just a huge
Yeah.
toll. Like it takes a lot out of me. So that's why I don't do it too much anymore. The other thing is they don't really appreciate me coming back anymore. Like knowing that I am not as actualized as I should be, kind of thing. Like
You
I don't know if
slacker.
that.
It's like
Well,
quit
yeah,
cutting
it's like
class.
you've been here so many times, and like your life hasn't changed that much. Like now you know the things you could do, and like why aren't you doing them as much? So that's the
Right.
other thing. Like, I feel like it is very sacred, and like I don't want to go back there until like I feel like I have something worth showing them. But anyways, so the funny trip, just really quick, I had just started working for Domino's delivering pizzas, and felt kind of insecure about that, because like, it's like delivering pizzas. This was like probably my sophomore year of college or something.
Uh-huh.
And so
I'm listening. I'm just going to get my rice out of the cooker. I forgot
yeah,
about it. Keep
so
talking. So
I
college dominoes, I'm listening.
so I smoke it, and then I find myself in like this panopticon kind of thing, like a prison where, well, it didn't feel like a prison. I'm just saying it structurally, like the structure of the place I was in felt like that, where it's like a giant hollow space with like a bunch of levels, and I was
Hmm.
like in the middle, and there was a bunch of these like balcony levels, right? And on each one, like surrounding me, looking at me, were all these fucking machine elves, like all connected together in their fractal way, and like they usually do, smiling really big and kind of having this like crazy like really just I don't know how to describe it. Fun loving, but also kind of making fun of shit at the same time.
I've
And
heard
the
enough
funny thing
McKenna
is,
where I get the idea. Yeah, it's like
yeah,
it's the trickster shit, basically.
yeah, for sure. And that energy is very present in my interaction with them. But the funny thing is, they were all fucking wearing Domino's uniforms, man. Like they were all. I saw every single one of them had the little thing on, and they were like kind of pointing and like laughing. It was so fucking funny, man. And so I think that really, like, I started laughing too. I was like, you guys are such dicks, but at the same time, like playing along, like it's fucking funny, because I thought it was funny too. But I think that kind of emphasizes this idea where it is kind of you're perceiving a part of yourself because, like I said, I did have
Yeah.
sort of this like subconscious insecurity about it, and they were kind of poking fun at me for it. So that was really interesting and funny. Um, Let me see if I can remember the other experience I was going to talk about. Eh,
Can I? I'm gonna let these dogs
I
out.
I
I've
have.
got 4 dogs I'm watching, and I gotta get 2 of them out, and I have to pee. So I'm gonna set this down and just hold your thought for 1 second, okay?
All right, I should probably head out pretty soon. If you just want to conclude this really quick.
You want to call it? I mean, it's your call.
Yeah, I'm down to
I
call it.
guess. All right,
I
word,
just wanted to say
dude.
one thing.
Yeah.
So just as far as well, you know what? We can leave it for another time. Why don't you go pee and then I'll wrap it up. Go ahead. I
All
don't
right.
want to keep.
Give me 10 seconds.
Yeah, let's talk, guys. Anybody have an interesting story to share or question or some kind of cryptic combination of emojis to send? I live in Boulder, Colorado right now, but I'm about to move.
Oh,
And then I have plans to
put my headphones in.
go back to Peru after this startup takes off. Hopefully, it'll be quite lucrative, and I'm going to buy some land and set up a healing center slash hostel slash neo shamanism laboratory with like state of the art high definition screens and for visuals and speakers inside a ceremonial hut
Word.
in the Amazon and invite producers from around the world to come and experiment with shamanism and their music. But now that you're back, and I should probably wrap this up, I just wanted to say because I feel like calling because earlier we were talking about that Chris Rock special where he says God is like imperfect.
Mhm.
I feel like that's a very heretical claim to make, and I feel like I didn't offer like a very good explanation as to justifying that mentality. So I just kind of wanted to revisit that.
For sure.
Um, so Chris Rock uses the example of a porcupine. He just says a porcupine is just it doesn't seem to serve a purpose and it's stinky and it's just disgusting and hurtful and there's no reason for it. I don't think that's a very good argument. The arguments that there's a few arguments that I have. So first off, I believe very deeply in this alchemical axiom as above so below. I believe that
So do I.
in
Yeah.
many ways it is a fractal and when it says in the Bible that we are like the image of God, in that sense we have this deep connection to God, and I think that one of the deepest things that we share is this concept of perfection, which if God is perfect, then we are perfect, but if we are
I
imperfect,
don't know how
then
you get to
God
that logical conclusion, but keep going. I mean, I
ultimately
don't see the.
perfection is
Well,
very
it's not
difficult.
saying we're in the image of God doesn't mean carbon copy. Like it's like this
Right,
could be a facsimile, right?
right,
So it's like a toy soldier isn't a soldier human, and you'd say that imaging one is imaging the other, but they're very fundamentally different things. So anyway,
right. But
keep going.
if you're going to make the argument that perfection is even possible, then you would have to assume that. the components of perfection are also perfect. Like you can't have a perfect system with imperfect parts, you know? Like that's like a
Correct.
contradiction.
Yeah,
So
it's a paradox to us at least.
essentially,
Correct. Yeah.
yeah. So here's another example, sort of, and this kind of plays into this idea that I've been entertaining a lot, which is that one of the deepest fundamental realities is that there's like a that chaos and order are the two essential constituents of reality, and like reality itself is the two sort of dancing around. And chaos is itself sort of inherently imperfect because it doesn't have any meaning really. Like that's the whole nature of chaos, is it doesn't have any order to it. Like it's the opposite of order. So in that sense, you would, I mean, if you're willing to accept that chaos and order are the two halves of reality, then half of reality, at least half of reality, or maybe not at least, but around half of reality has to be imperfect in that sense. And I think reality itself is kind of, that's not to say order is perfect, but I think order is the force that creates perfection. And so I think a lot of what reality is the attainment of perfection, and you can make the argument that that is perfection. And that's the funny thing. Like I believe that perfection is real and it's possible, but it is sort of like a paradox in the sense that you can never actually achieve it, and the act of pursuing it itself is what perfection is, and that's the closest thing you'll ever come to it. Is just basically like an optimization, an increasing of efficiency of the process of trying to attain it. That's the
How
closest you can get
Virgo.
to it. Yeah.
I mean, that's straight Virgo
Uh,
stuff. A few things, and then I'll let you go. So, a few
well,
presuppositions. I mean,
let me
one.
say the last. Let me say the
Okay.
last thing. This is just like this is just kind of like an example. So like people, everyone will have this experience where they interact with something that's just so disturbing. Like you could just use an example, like you're walking through the woods and then you come across like a baby bird that fell off the tree and it's just like basically like drowning in its own blood to death, like this slow agonizing death, and you're just like, why the fuck would a god, like create a perfect god, create this, right? And so obviously then the response to that is like, well, maybe it's supposed to teach you something, or maybe like it's serving some purpose or something. And it's not just like meaningless like pain and suffering for no reason. um, and that's fine, but that's only if you're willing to accept this sort of crazy notion that quantum physics is sort of positing, which I don't fully understand or agree with, that reality itself is like an experiential, like it's inherently based on like experience. Like it's the idea that if a tree falls and no one's there to hear it,
Did
it
it
doesn't
actually
make a sound.
fall? Yeah.
Right. So if you're willing to accept that, then yeah, like you can make the case that God's perfect. But if you're not willing to accept that, I think it's a little bit more of a pragmatic view that the tree still falls, you know, then essentially when you encounter this like bird that's bleeding to death or whatever, um, then you create this assumption in your head, and I think it's a very practical assumption to make. It's this isn't the only bird that's doing this, and this bird didn't fall for me. This is something that just fucking happens. It's just something that exists in reality. Like, probably happens all the time. Like there's probably several forests around the world where there's a little baby bird that fell out of its fucking nest and now it's bleeding to death, right?
Yeah.
So
The
that
issue is
that notion then,
anthropomorphization. I mean, if we're like identifying it as like this is meaningful for my story, that's where the trippy part gets. It's because like it may not have, that might just be an event outside. I mean, you're witnessing it, but like it might not have any consequence in terms of dynamos with your archetypal play or whatever. What if people when I think the justification people look for with quote evil, like when the problem of evil happens, like why do bad things happen? It's like things happen. You're projecting meaning onto these things, and if you see it as bad and you can't come to certain thing, like I mean, death is a thing, and if you see what I'm saying, like I think we tend to project anthropomorphized story onto stuff, and that's where people have that. That's where the cognitive dissonance happens, where it's like I can't make sense of this in my story, so either it's something part of a greater story that I can't explain, which I would lean towards more naturally, or they throw out all story altogether and say there is no God, there's no meaning, whatever, whatever. Um, just a couple things, and I'll let you go. Just to,
wait, but let me.
oh, you're not finished. Okay, go ahead. Uh oh, did I lose you?
Sorry, okay, I just got a long
You're
ass
cool.
ride. It's gonna be great, perfect timing.
Word, perfect
So
timing. Yeah.
let me just respond really quick, and then you can say what you were gonna say. So the idea is, um, you're right. We shouldn't impose our we should impose our human perspectives on objective reality and say that death is bad. And I don't mean to say that death is bad, but I think that, and this is a huge problem with like postmodernism and this whole notion that everything's meaningless, or at least like everything is like you can't discern good from bad because like there's like these are all just subjective models anyways. I think that's bullshit. And there's a book I was reading called the Cryptonomicon, which I highly recommend. It's a very crazy long book, and it has this really interesting interaction between basically an engineer, like a computer programmer, and he's sitting at a table of what's essentially the Illuminati, and the Illuminati is like telling him like well they're making the case for the postmodernism thing. They're like, well yeah, nothing means anything, so we can do whatever the fuck we want. Like it doesn't matter. But then this guy's
Mhm.
like, no, like you guys obviously aren't engineers, because if you were an engineer, you would understand that things do actually have certain like objective reality by comparing things. And so what I'm trying to say is not that death is bad. It's not that death should be avoided. It's that pain should be avoided. Pain is bad. Pain is a tool that we use. Pain isn't bad. Let me clarify. Pain's not bad, but there is definitely like an excess of pain that doesn't seem to go anywhere. It doesn't seem to do anything. And if birds are just falling out of trees left and right and suffering and for no reason to no end, no one ever interacts with them, no one ever experiences that, then what the fuck kind of perfect system is that? I think it's far more likely that it's
Well,
half imperfect, and the reason that we're here is to perfect it more. And if it were perfect, we wouldn't be here. There would be no point to anything. And again, we can't achieve perfection, we can't attain it, but the act of achieving it, trying to achieve it and attain it, that is what perfection is, I think. So it's almost again another fucking paradox. Like it is perfect, it's not perfect. I don't know, and I can't speak for God, but this is just Chris
I,
Rock is making these statements. He's a pretty fucking smart guy if you look at his if you watch his special. But your turn,
oh,
go
he's
ahead.
not done. Just a few things. So I don't think we're projecting quite a bit of meaning into the idea of perfection. I mean, a platonic ideal. I don't know if that even exists. If it does, like the DMT kind of realm, maybe that's what that is. Um, what the issue becomes, because we were talking about chaos and order and the balance, the necessities, like that's Shiva Shakti shit right there. It's like Shiva's holding the space, Shakti's doing the dancing, and that's how that little model works or whatever. In terms of, I mean, one of the presuppositions that I'm not really in agreement with, which is, like I said earlier, like to be in the image of something does not mean a correlation of exactitude in the sense that a toy soldier, like a GI Joe, is a human soldier, but they're not. It's a facsimile, but it's not exact in any way. To the degree that when we say we're in the image of God, I think that's co-creation, like the ability to create, destroy, things like that. Um, but in my estimation, God is this ineffable thing outside of creation itself, that is bigger than any imagination could hold, than any culture. Like nobody has the market on God. So when we try to put language and culture and story on this stuff, it articulates in specific lisps, and that's why we get like Judeo-Christianity or Buddhism or whatever, like all these versions of the same thing, or not the same thing, but basically it's all grace. And I mean, even things like the bird dying and things that we can't make sense of, like dinosaurs had to die for us to be here to have this conversation. Now, it just is what it is. You know what I mean? Like there's just a dance of cause and effect going on that is beyond good and evil in a sense. It's like it's not something to think about in those terms, but the fact that we are able to witness it and stuff, that's what I was saying earlier. It's a joy to be embarked on it, and to have the gratitude for that, I think, gives one a position of humility and gratitude, whether you have a theistic perspective or not. It gives you the right headspace to at least be participatory in this event called life a little more effectively than a nihilistic perspective, in my opinion. And I guess last thing I would say is all of creation, in my opinion, is made by, through, and for love. Like this is all an experiment in love, and we have human understandings that are culturally bound of what love and perfection and all these things are based off of desires of avoidance of fear and pain and all these things. But at the end of the day, there's something even greater and bigger than human perspective, that is allowing this to occur. Like there's a space holder, if you want to put it like that, and whether you get a direct revelation of a specific culture, and you become religious, or you just try to follow the Tao or whatever it does. I mean, that's, I'm not proselytizing, so I don't try to tell people what to do. But I think the issue I have with Chris Rock's kind of statement is he's saying I'm equating our imaging to what it like. It's it's all the way up the same way. So therefore, if we're imperfect, that's got to be imperfect. I think that's not a logical. There's a logical fallacy there, somewhat. You know what I mean? Like there's a distortion enough where it's like, well, he's presupposing that we're in the exact image of God. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think God's a bipedal fucking mammal or whatever, right?
Let me just can I just share one last thing?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let me just share the Gnostic perspective on God really quick, and I think this is sort of like a justification to this perspective a little bit more, and the dangers of your perspective essentially. And I'm not saying that I'm convicted in this at all. I feel more strongly toward this perspective, but I'm glad we're having this discussion because it's interesting to play with it. But
Hmm.
basically, the Gnostics believe that there is an unknowable God, and that is like the God that most like Christians talk about. It's like the highest God. They believe that God is unknowable. Like it's so old and so complex, like so convoluted. Like reality's become so convoluted at this point that it's essentially impossible to determine like what that God is.
I lost him. I'll wait for a second to see if Cup's back on. I'm gonna guess it's his lift ride being like, "Where the fuck are you?" Fascinating conversation, Maiko. Cool dude. I'll have to ask what his legal name is because I feel bad being like, "Yo, Maiko." Maybe that is his legal name. I'll wait a minute and see. Here I'm adding him again. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay, cool. You're cool. I figured it's your lift thing.
What I was saying was, what I was saying was, so there's
You're getting
this
into
like
like
distant.
demiurge kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, yeah. So there's like a distant, unknowable God, but then there's like other gods that we call them gods. They're like the people that are actually like pulling the strings, making the decisions. They call them demiurges or archons, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. And the problem with assuming that God's plan is perfect is that you're giving the bad archons basically like an excuse to do whatever
Free
the fuck
reign.
they want, and that's
Yeah, yeah.
very
It's tricky.
dangerous. So,
I totally hear
so
you. It
I
takes discernment. Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Like I don't
sorry,
look
but
around
I
the.
should probably go because I gotta pick someone up right now. So.
You're all good. Adios,
But
amigo.
let's do this again, man. This is fucking awesome.
Definitely.
You're the
Definitely.
shit, dude. This is great, and we got to keep having these discussions. I think that's the whole point of being here, is sharing the
Amen.
perspectives. And even if we never find the truth, like we're getting closer, and that's the whole point.
The
So
pursuit is the point. Yeah, you got it. All right, man. Have a good ride, and I'll talk to you later. Adios.
yeah, we'll do. Peace, much love, man. Have a good night.
Likewise.